Chapter 3381. Dazzling divine light illuminated a radius of 10,000 miles. The male and female god tribe powerhouses appeared on the battlefield, bathed in divine light. The two of them stood proudly and looked down at the crowd indifferently. Their postures were aloof. The Golden Dragon Emperor and the Grand Tutor were overjoyed when they saw the two powerhouses appear. They hurriedly bowed. "Greetings, Master and Mistress. We welcome your arrival. Greetings, Domain Lord and Mistress. We welcome your arrival." Just a moment ago, the two of them had been fleeing in panic and were filled with despair, but now, they were in high spirits and full of energy. They didn't even feel pain from their injuries. Without a doubt, the people who had suddenly arrived and saved the Golden Dragon Emperor and the Grand Tutor were the Golden Dragon Domain Lord and his wife. The Golden Dragon Domain Lord nodded slightly and said indifferently, "You may rise." The Golden Dragon Emperor and the Grand Tutor straightened their backs and hurriedly flew in front of the Domain Lord and his wife to complain about Ji Tianxing's crimes. "Master, those four bastards are the ones who invaded the Golden Dragon Empire and slaughtered the innocent God King. Not only did they kill the Crown Prince and the War Prince, but they also slaughtered 300 Imperial guards and wanted to kill us. Fortunately, Master and Mistress came in time and saved us. Otherwise, the Grand Tutor and I would be dead by now. Domain Lord, those four bastards are incomparably cruel. Their methods are so cruel that it makes one's hair stand on end. They have harmed the Golden Dragon Empire and killed innocent people. If we don't get rid of them, they will definitely harm the Golden Dragon Empire and wreak havoc in the entire Golden Dragon domain. When that happens, the people of the Golden Dragon domain will be in dire straits and misery." The Golden Dragon Emperor and the Imperial Tutor both exaggerated and tearfully accused Ji Tianxing and the others of their evil deeds. Their acting was very realistic. Not only did Ji Tianxing and the others show disdainful sneers, but the Golden Dragon Domain Lord and his wife also frowned slightly. They seemed to think that the Golden Dragon Emperor and the Grand Tutor's performance was too exaggerated. Of course, the Golden Dragon Domain Lord and his wife didn't show any dissatisfaction. The Golden Dragon Emperor was his disciple after all. If he was bullied and wronged, he would naturally complain to his master and ask for help. As his master and the overlord of the Golden Dragon domain, he naturally had to step in and resolve this matter. The ruler of the Golden Dragon region looked down at Ji Tianxing and the others from above. After sizing them up for a while, he sneered arrogantly, "Hey, God Kings are rarely seen on normal days. I didn't think that four of them would appear today. However, do you think that just because you have more people, you can act tyrannically and commit crimes in this king's territory? 3 low-level divine kings and a 4th-stage realm middle-level divine king. No matter how many people there are, they're also nothing more than clay chickens and pottery dog." Not only was the Golden Dragon region's domain master a mid-level god king, but he had also reached the 5th level of the God King realm. Of course, he could see the strength of Ji Tianxing, Yank, and the others. Lan was the weakest among them, at the 1st level of the Divine King realm. Ji Tianxing was slightly stronger, he was also at the 1st level of the God King realm. Chao Qingyu was ranked 2nd, 3rd Divine King realm. The strongest among them, Yank, was only at the 4th level of the Divine King realm. As for the ruler of the Golden Dragon region, he was a 5th-stage realm middle-level divine king. The beautiful lady beside him, who was also his master's wife, Qiu Lian, was also at the 3rd level of the God King realm. Therefore, the ruler of the Golden Dragon region did not put Ji Tianxing and the others in his eyes. Divine King Qiu Lian held onto the ruler's arm and looked down at Yank indifferently. She said, "Big guy, you might be an overlord in other parts of the continent. Unfortunately, you've already crossed the line. Do you understand the saying a strong dragon cannot suppress a local snake? What's more, you're a snake that has crossed the line. We're the dragons that have coiled up." Yank was stunned. He frowned and looked at Divine King Qiu Lian. He muttered to himself, "Is there something wrong with this old woman's eyes? Why are you talking nonsense with me?" Unexpectedly, not only Divine King Qiu Lian, but even the ruler of the Golden Dragon region looked down at him and said coldly, "Big guy, we're all God Kings. This king will give you a chance to reconcile on account of your difficult cultivation. As long as you hand over your 3 companions to me and apologize to me, this king will let you go. However, you have to promise me that you'll never set foot in the Golden Dragon region again. How about it? The ruler of the Golden Dragon region's intentions were obvious. Although he was confident that he could defeat Ji Tianxing and Yank, they were still god kings. If he and Divine King Qiu Lian were to fight to the death, they would be severely injured even if they could kill them. Since that was the case, it would be best to avoid bloodshed. However, Yank obviously would not agree. He looked up at the ruler of the Golden Dragon region and Divine King Qiu Lian and sneered, "Firstly, the 2 of you are no match for us. You're the ones who should be begging for mercy. Secondly, you can't even tell who's the core of the group. You're not fit to show off your strength in front of this king." After he finished speaking, Yang Ku took a step back and stood behind Ji Tianxing, his hands hanging by his side. The ruler of the Golden Dragon region and Divine King Qiu Lian were stunned. Only then did they realize that Ji Tianxing was the core of the group. Their expressions were awkward and their eyes were filled with doubt. They frowned and sized up Ji Tianxing. He's just a first heaven realm god king. How can he control 3rd and 4th heaven realm god kings? That white-robed kid looks ordinary, but he's the core of the group. Could he be the young master of some ancient clan? Or is he the son of some high-level god king? The ruler of the Golden Dragon region and Divine King Qiu Lian looked at each other and communicated secretly. They could not figure it out. At this time, the Golden Dragon Emperor and the State Preceptor quickly explained to them. "Lord Ruler, please don't underestimate that white-robed youth. He is indeed the strongest of the 4. Although his strength is not as strong as the other 2 god kings, his strength is much stronger. However, his battle prowess is even stronger, and the techniques he uses are even more profound and exquisite." The ruler of the Golden Dragon region nodded slightly and thought to himself, "He's only a 1st heaven realm god king, but he's stronger than a 4th heaven realm god king? Interesting. I would like to see for myself if there's such a genius in this world." Divine King Qiu Lian frowned and reminded her son, "Long that kid can make intermediate god kings submit to him. He must be extraordinary. Don't underestimate him." Before the ruler of the Golden Dragon region could reply, Ji Tianxing asked, "Have you guys come up with a plan? Are we going to fight or not? If you're scared out of your wits, apologize to me and take those 2 idiots away." Compared to the Golden Dragon region's ruler's arrogance, Ji Tianxing's words were even more arrogant. The ruler of the Golden Dragon region and Divine King Qiu Lian frowned and a cold light flashed in their eyes. "Kid, you're too arrogant. Why don't you take a look at where you are? How dare you act so presumptuously?" The ruler of the Golden Dragon region and Divine King Qiu Lian shouted angrily and immediately took out their king-grade divine weapons. Their bodies emitted a terrifying murderous aura. An invisible god king's aura spread in all directions and sealed off an area of 10,000 miles. The Golden Dragon Emperor and the State Preceptor were excited and fearful. They quickly retreated far away to avoid being affected by the battle. Chapter 3382. Divine King Qiu Lian's weapons were 2 low-grade king-level feather fans. The pure white feather fan wasn't big, but it had an ancient charm. It was exquisitely made. There was a circle of divine jade pendants around the feather fan, which wrapped around 12 different colored and elemental king-level immortal stones. The power of these 2 divine artifacts was extraordinary, and they complemented each other well when she held them in her hands. The Golden Dragon region ruler's weapon was a 5-foot-long golden dragon truncheon. The truncheon was dark gold, and it looked like a 5-clawed golden dragon. It exuded a holy and ferocious aura. Even though it was only a low-grade king-level divine weapon. The Golden Dragon truncheon was made by the Golden Dragon region ruler's master after thousands of years of hard work. It was extremely powerful. After the Golden Dragon region ruler obtained it, he had nurtured it for more than 10,000 years. He had already turned it into his natal divine weapon, which made it even more powerful and effective. "Kid, let me see what right you have to be so arrogant," the Golden Dragon region ruler roared. He made a hand seal with his left hand and waved the truncheon with his right hand. He charged toward Ji Tianxing valiantly. He took a step forward and appeared above Ji Tianxing's head. He smashed the truncheon down with the truncheon. The golden dragon mace emitted a blinding golden light. It unleashed a destructive force that suppressed Ji Tianxing. Good timing. Ji Tianxing roared and waved the burial of heaven fearlessly. He used his ultimate sword technique to block the golden dragon region ruler's attack. Galaxy break. The burial of heaven shone with silver divine light and formed a giant starry sword that was 10,000 feet long. It slashed toward the golden dragon truncheon. Everything within a few thousand miles was illuminated by the golden and silver light. Everyone seemed to see billions of stars falling and a divine golden dragon flying across the sky. Several hundred types of divine Tao laws also released a vast and mighty power, causing layers of divine Tao runes to appear in the sky. The first move of the two was their most powerful ultimate divine ability. Everyone was in awe. Kaboom! In the next moment, the giant starry sword and the golden divine dragon collided. A deafening explosion spread for 10,000 miles. The giant starry sword was shattered, and billions of rays of starlight spilled out. It was as if the stars were falling from the sky. The golden divine dragon was also shaken, and dazzling golden light bloomed like fireworks. The golden dragon region ruler and Ji Tianxing clashed and gained the upper hand in the first move. He was only pushed back 10,000 feet, and the truncheon in his hand trembled a dozen times. Ji Tianxing, on the other hand, was sent flying 30 miles away, rolling and crashing into the lava ocean below. The golden dragon region ruler's combat power. Yang Ku and Chao Qingyu were filled with worry, but the golden dragon emperor and imperial tutor were cheering excitedly. The golden dragon region ruler was the golden dragon region ruler was the golden dragon region rulers. He disappeared from where he was golden dragon. In the next moment, he teleported behind the golden dragon domain's domain master and stabbed 49 times with his sword. This was his ultimate sword technique. Even though the golden dragon region master had the upper hand, he didn't underestimate his opponent. He seemed to have anticipated that Ji Tianxing would take advantage of the situation to counterattack. He swung the golden dragon truncheon in a backhand motion and unleashed 9 divine and mighty golden dragon shadows. 9 dragons seal the sky. Bang, 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 bang. 9 domineering golden dragon silhouettes that were tens of thousands of feet long smashed through the sword lights in the sky and headed toward Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing didn't try to block it, nor did he try to take it head-on. With a flash, he teleported 500 miles away, retreating far away. Boom! The 9 golden dragon silhouettes carried with them the power to destroy heaven and earth as they fiercely crashed into the vast sea of lava, splashing up huge waves that soared into the sky. Massive waves of 10,000 feet tall blotted out the sun as boundless 7-colored divine flames sealed off an area within a radius of 10,000 miles. The golden dragon region ruler and the golden dragon region ruler were shocked. They quickly ran away to avoid being affected by the divine fire. At this moment, Yang, Chao Qingyu, and Lana had joined forces to attack divine King Qiu Lian. Unfortunately, divine King Qiu Lian was only at the 3rd heaven realm. Even though she was old and had cultivated for a long time, she was only slightly stronger than Chao Qingyu. With Lana, she was at a disadvantage. She could only defend and defend. Yang's attack pushed her into the abyss of hell. She was getting closer and closer to death. Bang, bang, bang. Rumble. The two sides fought fiercely in the sky. They used all kinds of exquisite divine powers and clashed fiercely in the sky. The divine lights and shadows all over the sky were shattered. Billions of divine light shards fell from the sky and generated a destructive blast wave that swept across tens of thousands of miles in radius. This region was in complete chaos. It had completely become a world of lava and 7-colored divine flames. The golden dragon region ruler and the golden dragon region ruler tried their best to escape. However, the golden dragon region ruler couldn't avoid the lava waves in time and was swallowed by the divine fire. He was already severely injured. One of his arms had been cut off, so his strength was greatly reduced. After being engulfed by the giant wave of lava and the 7-colored divine fire, he could only struggle and scream a few times before he was burned to ashes by the 7-colored divine fire. Even his godhead didn't manage to escape the sea of fire. It fell into the sea of lava and soon vanished into thin air. The Golden Dragon region ruler was furious and helpless. He watched the Golden Dragon region ruler die, but he couldn't save him. He didn't even have time to stop and feel sad. He could only try his best to escape. Otherwise, he would also be engulfed by the lava waves and burned to ashes by the divine fire. He had great confidence in the Golden Dragon region ruler and divine king Qiu Lian. However, a battle between divine kings like this was not something he could participate in. He didn't even have the right to watch the battle nearby. Finally, he escaped from the area enveloped by the lava and 7-colored divine flames after he had fled 30,000 miles away. He was finally safe. Only then did he dare to stop and look at the battlefield. Unfortunately, he was too far away. The center of the battlefield was a mess. He could only see the lava and divine fire. He couldn't see the situation of the divine kings. Even if he released his divine perception, he couldn't see through the chaotic divine power. He couldn't even see the situation at the center of the battlefield. The Golden Dragon region ruler and divine king Qiu Lian couldn't do anything. He could only pray in his heart that the region ruler and divine king Qiu Lian could kill Ji Tianxing and the others quickly. However, the actual situation on the battlefield was completely different from what the Golden Dragon region ruler had imagined. Divine King Qiu Lian was surrounded by Yang, Chao Qingyu, and Lan Er. She was at a disadvantage from the beginning. She was in a very dangerous situation. After exchanging a few blows, she was sent flying by Yang and vomited blood. After that, she was in a state of defense and escape. She gritted her teeth and endured Yang and the other two's fierce attacks. She didn't even have time to breathe. As time passed, her divine power was quickly depleted. Her injuries worsened, and she looked more and more miserable. Not far away, the Golden Dragon region ruler had the upper hand. His Golden Dragon Jian was a king-grade divine weapon, while Ji Tianxing's Burial of Heaven was a monarch-grade divine weapon. Even if their combat strength was equal, Ji Tianxing was at a disadvantage because of his weapon. He couldn't fight the Golden Dragon region ruler head-on. He could only fight from afar. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3383. The Golden Dragon Domain's Domain Master had been taking the initiative to attack, forcing Ji Tianxing to retreat and move away quickly. However, he couldn't injure Ji Tianxing in a short period of time. Moreover, he realized that Divine King Qiu Lian was in a perilous situation. She was already covered in wounds. Seeing Divine King Qiu Lian's disheveled hair and blood-stained dress, his heart tightened. He quickly rushed over to help. However, Ji Tianxing went all out to attack the Golden Dragon region's domain master. The Golden Dragon domain ruler was immediately held back. He couldn't ignore Ji Tianxing's attacks. He could only stop and use his arts to block and neutralize them. Even though Ji Tianxing's fierce attacks didn't work and were all neutralized by him, he was still being held back by Ji Tianxing. He couldn't leave at all, let alone help Divine King Qiu Lian. He couldn't help Ji Tianxing at all. The two sides were more than 2,000 miles apart. He could only watch as Divine King Qiu Lian's injuries worsened under the combined attacks of Yang and the other two. Every time Divine King Qiu Lian was sent flying or suffered new wounds or screamed in pain, the Golden Dragon domain ruler's heart would twitch. He used all kinds of methods and used all his strength to help Divine King Qiu Lian. However, he was stopped by Ji Tianxing. The Golden Dragon domain ruler was helpless. He didn't care about his own injuries after taking one of Ji Tianxing's attacks. He wanted to teleport to save Divine King Qiu Lian. However, Ji Tianxing had already noticed his intentions. He decisively used the space-snapping Rising Dragon Slash. Crack! A divine golden dragon tens of thousands of feet long roared at the sky. It tore open a 500-mile-long spatial rift in the sea of lava. The pitch-black rift was like an abyss. It separated the two sides of the space. The Golden Dragon domain ruler's teleportation was stopped. He couldn't hold back his killing intent and anger any longer. He exploded. "Ah, you damned beast. I'm going to cut you into pieces and pull out your tendons." The realm master of the Golden Dragon realm cursed like a madman as he unleashed his most powerful killing move at Ji Tianxing at the cost of 1,000 years of cultivation. Meteor Dragon Annihilation Strike. The Golden Dragon Domain Master gripped the Golden Dragon truncheon with both hands and glared at Ji Tianxing with his eyes wide open. His whole body was burning with bloody flames as he swung the truncheon at Ji Tianxing. The Golden Dragon mace shone with boundless divine light, condensing into a 100-mile-long divine golden dragon that descended from the sky. Boom! The divine golden dragon fell like a meteor. It destroyed the 2 layers of golden light with a loud bang, passed through the space crack, and rushed in front of Ji Tianxing. It seemed that Ji Tianxing had no time to dodge and was about to be struck by the holy golden dragon. Even if he didn't die, he would be seriously injured. At the critical moment, he finally used his trump card that he hadn't used for a long time. Sword of Destruction. The world of 5 elements provided a vast amount of power, which condensed into a 100-mile-long golden sword. This sword pierced through the sky and the sea of magma. It was like a sword that split open the heavens. Its divine might was violent to the extreme. Boom! The holy giant sword unleashed an apocalyptic might as it struck the holy golden dragon, resulting in an earth-shattering boom. At that moment, the sea of magma within a radius of 30,000 miles was shaken and stirred up. The loud bang spread for 60 to 70,000 miles before it gradually disappeared. The holy giant sword and the golden dragon collapsed at the same time, erupting a destructive shock wave that swept in all directions. In this clash of moves, it was still Ji Tianxing who was at a disadvantage. He was sent flying 100 miles away. His face was pale, his chest was heaving up and down rapidly, and he coughed up blood. After all, the Golden Dragon Domain Master had used up 1,000 years of cultivation to forcibly double his combat power, making the Meteor Dragon Annihilation Strike's power to the extreme. Although Ji Tianxing borrowed the power of the world of 5 elements, the Sword of Burial of Heaven was not a king-level divine artifact after all, so it couldn't exert its full power. Naturally, Ji Tianxing was defeated by the Golden Dragon Domain Master's truncheon again. However, only his internal organs were injured. His Divine Tao Foundation was not damaged, so it didn't affect his ability to continue fighting. When the Golden Dragon Domain Master saw that Ji Tianxing was pushed back, he seized this rare opportunity and rushed into the distance to save Divine King Qiu Lian. However, he had just used up 1,000 years of cultivation to use a forbidden technique, so his body was greatly affected. His combat power was quickly weakened, and his speed was also reduced. However, he didn't care. He only wanted to save Divine King Qiu Lian, so he rushed over as fast as he could. Yank, Chao Qingyu, and Lan Er swung their swords again and were about to strike Divine King Qiu Lian. The Golden Dragon Domain Master roared and rushed over without caring about his own safety. He waved his truncheon and shot out dozens of divine lights, blocking Yank and company's attacks. Divine King Qiu Lian finally had a chance to catch her breath. When she saw the Golden Dragon Domain Master rushing over to save her without caring about his own safety, she was deeply moved, and her eyes were covered with a layer of mist. However, the Golden Dragon Domain Master was anxious and didn't have time to communicate with her through voice transmission to ask about her injuries. He waved his truncheon and forced Yank and Chao Qingyu back. At the same time, he shouted to Divine King Qiu Lian, Lian come over quickly. Let's leave this place. Without a doubt, the Golden Dragon Domain Master was thinking of retreating. After the intense battle just now, he had already witnessed Ji Tianxing's terrifying strength. Although he was slightly better and could suppress Ji Tianxing, the Golden Dragon Domain Master was outnumbered. However, they had the advantage in numbers. With 3 God Kings surrounding Qiu Lian, if they continued to drag things out, God King Qiu Lian would definitely die. Under such circumstances, the Golden Dragon Domain Master had to assess the situation and escape with Divine King Qiu Lian first. He would find a chance to take revenge in the future. However, it was a pity. Before Divine King Qiu Lian could reach the Golden Dragon Domain Master, Ji Tianxing caught up and attacked the Golden Dragon Domain Master fiercely. Swish, swish, swish. Heavenly Dragon Slash. Sky-breaking sword. The Golden Dragon Domain Master had no choice but to use his truncheon to block Ji Tianxing's attacks with all his might. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Yang, Chao Qingyu, and Lan rushed toward Divine King Qiu Lian and attacked her together. The previous scene played out once again. The two sides were in a fierce battle. The Golden Dragon Domain Master and Divine King Qiu Lian were separated and could not look after each other. This time, the Golden Dragon Domain Master could not sacrifice his 1,000 years of cultivation to forcefully break free from Ji Tianxing's entanglement. No matter how furious and manic he was, he could only carefully deal with Ji Tianxing's fierce attacks and attacks. Seeing Divine King Qiu Lian's injuries getting worse and worse and her screams of pain, he was so angry that he almost went berserk. Time passed. Half an hour passed quickly. The first to give up was the heavily injured and weak Divine King Qiu Lian. When she was sent flying by Chao Qingyu and Lan Yang Ku let out a furious roar and stabbed out with his bronze halberd, piercing through her forehead. Catcher! With a crisp crack, Divine King Qiu Lian's head exploded, splattering blood everywhere. Her divine body was destroyed, and her corpse fell into the sea of lava. Only a quintessence escaped into the distance. However, Yang Ku chased after her and after a few breaths of time, he shattered her godhead with his halberd. Swish! 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 More than a dozen quintessence fragments fell into the sky and drifted away. Just like that, Divine King Qiu Lian died. Not far away, the Golden Dragon Domain Master saw this scene with his own eyes. As if struck by lightning, his body stiffened, and his eyes turned bloodshot. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3384. If the Golden Dragon Domain ruler were to ask who he loved the most in this world, it would be himself. However, the one who was second to him was his master's wife, Qiu Lian. 18,000 years ago, he was attracted by Qiu Lian's beauty and temperament. That was why he became the disciple of the bearded man. His master was rather boorish. He was a typical hot-headed man. He didn't know how to be romantic, nor did he know how to take care of people. However, he was willing to be his master's disciple and serve him wholeheartedly. It was all because his master's wife silently watched him, encouraged and cared for him. No matter how strict his master was with him, no matter how much he scolded or beat him, he endured it. When his master went into seclusion and went out, it was the happiest time of his life. That was because it was just him and his master's wife. As time passed, the relationship between the two became more and more distorted and deep. Gradually, his master found some clues. He had some suspicions, but he didn't have any evidence. Therefore, his master vented his anger on the ruler of the Golden Dragon region. He was even more strict with him, scolding and beating him for the slightest carelessness. The ruler of the Golden Dragon region continued to endure, but the hatred in his heart accumulated over time. His master was no longer someone he respected, but a thorn in his heart. He wanted to get rid of him the most. 12,000 years ago, the ruler of the Golden Dragon region also broke through to the Divine King realm. He began to plan how to get rid of his master. He racked his brains and tried all kinds of methods to get rid of him. A few hundred years later, he finally encountered a golden opportunity that came once in a blue moon. Therefore, he took advantage of his master's seclusion to sneak attack him. His master was severely injured and fell into a pool of blood. He glared at him with hatred and resentment and asked him why he did it. Were they that impatient to snatch the inherited divine ability and the Golden Dragon Swordbreaker? At that time, the ruler of the Golden Dragon region was very calm and answered frankly, "I didn't do it for the inheritance or the Golden Dragon Gen. I did it for the woman I love the most." His master suddenly realized and roared in anger, "That's your master's wife. You disgraceful beast, you will be punished by the heavens." The ruler of the Golden Dragon region didn't feel guilty at all. Instead, he sneered proudly, "She will no longer be my master's wife after I get rid of you." His master counterattacked and used a forbidden technique. He also severely injured the ruler of the Golden Dragon region. After all, he was too young, and the difference in strength between him and his master was too great. He was about to be killed by his master on the spot. Or perhaps, both master and disciple would perish together. At this moment, Qiu Lian appeared. She ignored her master's cries for help. She only had eyes for the Golden Dragon Domain's ruler. Under her master's incredulous gaze, She took out a divine weapon and stabbed it into her master's forehead. Just like that, his master died with his eyes wide open. The realm master of the Golden Dragon domain felt like he was in a dream. From then on, he swore in his heart that he would only love Qiu Lian and would never betray her. In this world, only Qiu Lian was the most important person to him. Later on, he fulfilled his initial wish and got together with Qiu Lian. He had always thought that he and Qiu Lian would love each other forever and be happy together. But he never imagined that Qiu Lian would be killed by 3 alien god kings right before his eyes. Moreover, they died very miserably. They were reduced to ashes, and not even a corpse was left behind. The realm master of the Golden Dragon domain's heart was shattered. It was as if the strongest pillar in his heart was gone. At that moment, he even felt that life was meaningless. He only wanted to die with Qiu Lian. So much so that he unconsciously self-destructed. He wanted Ji Tianxing, Yank, Chao Qingyu, and the rest to die with Qiu Lian. Let's die together. The realm master of the Golden Dragon domain roared like a madman. He shook his head wildly, and his messy hair danced in the wind. His entire body was burning with bloody flames. His aura became incomparably chaotic and violent. His divine body also began to sway. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing, Yank, Chao Qingyu, and Lan were shocked and fearful. Their expressions became serious. Damn it! This guy is crazy. Is that woman that important to him? He wants to self-destruct and drag us down with him? A 5th stage God King self-destruction will definitely destroy everything within a few 100,000 miles. We can't escape. This time, we are really going to die with him. The power of a middle-stage God King's self-destruction was unimaginably terrifying. Not to mention Chao Qingyu and Lan even Ji Tianxing and Yank did not have the confidence to save their lives. But now that things had come to this, they could not sit still and wait for death. They could only escape as fast as they could. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. In just 2 short breaths, the 4 of them had teleported a few times and retreated 30,000 miles away. At this moment, a scene that left everyone dumbfounded appeared. The furious realm master of the Golden Dragon domain stopped his self-destruction. His swollen divine body returned to normal, and the bloody flames on his body disappeared. Swoosh. While Ji Tianxing and the rest were unprepared, he used his ultimate skill and broke open a crack in space. He decisively entered it. In the next moment, he crossed 100,000 miles and appeared on the surface of the magma sea. He did not even look back as he fled toward the exit of the abyss. Ah, that works. This. He has already self-destructed. How can he stop halfway? Maybe he has some special technique. After all, he is a middle-stage God King. He might have mastered some kind of ultimate skill. Who knows? That guy looked angry and crazy. I didn't expect that to be his disguise. He had already made up his mind to use this method to force us to retreat and then escape. He is too cunning. Just now, I thought that he loved his wife so much that he would rather die with her. I didn't expect him to be such a hypocrite. It's so disgusting. Lan was very disappointed and disdainful. Yank and Chao Qingyu nodded in agreement. Ji Tianxing sighed and said faintly, "It seems that the realm master of the Golden Dragon domain loves himself the most." Yank looked in the direction that the realm master of the Golden Dragon domain had escaped. Then, he looked at Ji Tianxing and asked, "Master, should we chase after him?" Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said, "No need. We can't catch up. It's just a waste of time." This was the truth. Although the realm master of the Golden Dragon domain was injured, his injuries were not serious. He still retained most of his strength. The most important thing was that he had pretended to self-destruct to scare everyone away. The distance between them was more than 100,000 miles. The terrain of the magma sea was complicated. It was too difficult to catch up with the realm master of the Golden Dragon domain. After a while, the divine light that covered the sky dissipated. The magma sea gradually calmed down. Ji Tianxing ordered, "Everyone is slightly injured and spent a lot of energy. Let's rest and recuperate first. The realm master of the Golden Dragon domain has escaped. He won't dare to seek revenge in the short term. No one in the entire Golden Dragon domain can threaten us. After you have recovered, we will look for the king-level divine object that is about to appear. After we get the divine object, we can leave the abyss. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 3385. Yank, Chao Qingyu, and Lana had been fighting for a long time and were exhausted. Not only did they need to recover their divine power, but they also needed to treat their injuries. Therefore, they returned to Chao Qingyu's divine ship to recuperate. Ji Tianxing cleaned up the battlefield alone and searched for spoils of war in the Sea of Lava. Even though they had managed to kill 300 Imperial Army members in the previous battles, they were still unable to do so. Countless divine weapons, interspatial rings, and shards of godheads were scattered in the Sea of Lava. But now that 2 hours had passed, those monarch-grade divine weapons, interspatial rings, and shards of godheads had long been incinerated by the seven-colored divine fire. Ji Tianxing and the other three fought with the Golden Dragon Region Master and Divine King Qiu Lian. The shockwaves from the battle were enough to destroy the remaining debris. Therefore, in the chaotic battlefield, there were no spoils of war to speak of. Only, Divine King Qiu Lian's shard of Godhead had fallen from the sky into the Sea of Lava and was drifting slowly. After all, Divine King Qiu Lian had died less than 100 breaths ago. She was a third heaven realm divine king. Neither the lava nor the seven-colored divine fire could melt her shard of Godhead in a short period of time. Swoosh swoosh swoosh. Ji Tianxing quickly found Divine King Qiu Lian's shard of Godhead in the Sea of Lava and kept it in his interspatial ring. Then, he brought Chao Qingyu's divine ship and flew to the reef island 40,000 miles away. He began to recuperate. The reef island was not big. It was only 100 feet wide and looked like a huge rock protruding out of the Sea of Lava. Because the island was too small and had no ore veins, no one cared about it. After the Battle of the Divine Kings, the reef island was also affected. It was torn apart and shrunk by half. Ji Tianxing took out the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda and placed it on the reef island before entering the distorted space. After a while, he flew to the center of the distorted space and returned to the bloody flame sacred tree. When he was still far away, he felt that something was wrong. Today, the blood flame sacred tree was especially dazzling, like a blazing torch soaring into the sky. When he got closer, he saw that the blood flame sacred tree was burning fiercely, and purple flames were rising into the sky. What surprised Ji Tianxing even more was that the blood flame sacred tree, which was originally 12,000 feet tall, was actually growing at a speed visible to the naked eye. The entire divine tree continued to grow taller and taller, and new branches and leaves quickly grew out. It also exuded a vast and powerful divine aura. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianxing was stunned for a moment before revealing a gratified smile. From the looks of it, the blood flame sacred tree has absorbed too much blood essence. Is it going to break through the limit of the monarch realm and evolve into the divine king realm? With his previous experience, Ji Tianxing could tell at a glance that the blood flame sacred tree must have been injected with a huge amount of energy during the previous battle. 300 divine Lord Realm Imperial Guards had been killed. It was unknown just how much blood energy and souls the blood flame sacred tree had absorbed. And just now, Divine King Qiu Lian had also been killed. When a divine king expert died, the soul and blood energy that seeped out was countless times purer and stronger than that of a divine lord. Over the years, the blood flame sacred tree had devoured far too many divine lord experts' blood energy and souls, but it had remained at the supreme grade monarch level. But now, Divine King Qiu Lian's death had become an opportunity for the blood flame sacred tree to break through. This should be considered an unexpected gain. Ji Tianxing murmured to himself, feeling very satisfied in his heart. Based on the current evolution speed, the blood flame sacred tree would need another 3 to 5 days before it could truly break through to the divine king level. Ji Tianxing did not waste any more time. He sat cross-legged under the sacred tree and began to circulate his energy to heal his injuries and recover his divine power. At the same time, the Golden Dragon Domain ruler hurriedly left the Golden Dragon Abyss and returned to the vast sea of clouds. Around the Abyss exit, more than 100 factions had left behind many divine warships, as well as countless divine lord experts and guards. Fortunately, the Golden Dragon domain ruler had chosen to teleport thousands of miles away from the abyss exit, so no one had seen him. Otherwise, his disheveled and ragged appearance would have been seen by the experts of the various empires, and the news would have spread throughout the Golden Dragon domain. At that time, his prestige as a domain ruler would plummet, and his reputation and prestige would be questioned. Huff! Huff! The ruler of the Golden Dragon realm panted heavily as he turned his head to look at the Golden Dragon abyss. Seeing that Ji Tianxing and the others did not chase after him, he was slightly relieved and flew into the distance. Along the way, his anger had yet to subside. His heart was filled with hatred. His face was still twisted and ferocious, and his eyes were vicious and resentful. He had seen the woman he loved the most being killed in front of his eyes, and not even her corpse was left intact. Who could understand that kind of anger, hatred, and pain? If possible, the Golden Dragon domain ruler was willing to capture Ji Tianxing and the others at all costs and torture them with the cruelest of punishments. Even if he extracted their souls and tortured them with lightning and divine fire for 10,000 years, it would not be enough to appease the hatred in the Golden Dragon domain ruler's heart. Lian don't worry, no matter what price I have to pay, I will avenge you. After a long time, the Golden Dragon domain ruler finally calmed down, and he muttered through gritted teeth. After calming down, he began to think about how to take revenge. He was the only God King left in the Golden Dragon domain, and he was no match for Ji Tianxing and the others. Even if another God King like Lian came, she would only be courting death. Therefore, if he wanted to kill Ji Tianxing and the others, he had to find a stronger God King who was not weaker than him. Apart from that, he also had to come up with a plan to take revenge. At the thought of finding help, the figures of several God Kings immediately appeared in the Golden Dragon domain ruler's mind. Those God King powerhouses were the domain lords of the Golden Dragon region. Some of them had grudges with him, some of them had no relationship with him, and some of them were his friends. Therefore, he took out a special communication jade slip and sent a message to his best friend. My younger brother, Feihong, I've run into trouble today. Without a doubt, this message was sent to Yunyang's domain ruler, Jing Feihong. Naturally, the Golden Dragon domain ruler would not be hypocritical and polite to his best friend. He went straight to the point and explained what had happened. He wanted to ask Jing Feihong for help to fight Ji Tianxing and the others. For this, he could pay a huge price, such as ceding his territory, gifting a large number of people and cultivation resources, and so on. However, something he did not expect happened. After a quarter of an hour, Jing Feihong replied with a message. In the message, Jing Feihong's tone was rather odd as he asked, Brother Long, is the God King of a foreign race you mentioned a human youth? He's wearing a white robe, with black hair and black eyes. He's very handsome, and he's holding a pitch-black sovereign-level divine sword. If it's him, then it's not surprising. Not too long ago, he had fought a great battle with this king in Yunyang region. He injured this king and even killed the High-Wind Divine King. I didn't expect him to go to your Golden Dragon domain after leaving the Cloud domain and kill your beloved wife. Don't worry, Brother Long, he's our common enemy. I'll help you kill him. Chapter 3386. After receiving Jing Feihong's message jade slip, the Golden Dragon region lord was stunned for a moment, his face full of astonishment. That human kid in white robes is called Tianxing. He claims to be the region lord of Tiger Cleave and fought with Jing Feihong? In that case, he came all the way south from Yunyang region to Golden Dragon region. Not only did he kill Lingfeng Divine King, but he also injured Jing Feihong. The Golden Dragon region lord murmured to himself. He felt that this was too much of a coincidence to be true. However, on second thought, this was also a good thing. At least, Tianxing had a deep grudge against Jing Feihong. He could ask Jing Feihong for help without paying any price, ceding his territory, or gifting cultivation resources. However, after some careful consideration, he still felt uneasy. This won't do. That kid is very strong and has 3 divine kings as his helpers. Even if I join forces with Jing Feihong, I don't have much confidence in winning. I need to find more helpers to have enough confidence. After making up his mind, the Golden Dragon region lord took out 2 message jade slips and sent messages to the other 2 region lords. These two region lords were considered to be on better terms with him among the few region lords around Golden Dragon region. Although they did not have a deep relationship, at least there was no conflict or hatred. They could be considered acquaintances. The Golden Dragon region lord knew very well that the other party might not be willing to help without a reason. Therefore, he straightforwardly stated his reason and said that he was willing to cede a part of his territory and gift a batch of cultivation resources. After sending the message, he continued on his way back to the Divine Palace. After waiting for about an hour, one of the region lords sent back a message. Whoosh! When the message jade slip landed in his hand, he quickly released his divine sense to read the message inside. A middle-aged man's voice immediately sounded in his mind. Lord Golden Dragon Region Lord, I'm very sorry. My region lord began his seclusion 20 years ago and is now at a critical juncture of his cultivation. I'm afraid my region lord will not come out of seclusion for 100 years. I apologize again for not being able to help you. Without a doubt. The person who sent the message was not the region master, but the region master's assistant, another lower divine king. The Golden Dragon region's domain master was rather depressed and helpless at the same time. Regardless of whether the region lord was really in closed-door cultivation or using closed-door cultivation as an excuse, he could no longer seek help from the other party, nor could he blame the other party. He could only continue to wait and place his hopes on the second domain lord. Another 2 hours passed. The ruler of the Golden Dragon realm had already left the entrance of the abyss and was flying through the sea of clouds. At this moment, the second area master finally sent him a message. When he finished reading the contents of the message, he immediately frowned and his face became gloomy. Damn it! Yi Qing, that old thief, actually took advantage of the situation and asked for a sky-high price. Truly abominable to the extreme. The Golden Dragon region master's face was ashen with rage, and he clenched his fists so tightly that his knuckles cracked, and his eyes were burning with fury. Originally, he had offered Domain Lord Yi Qing 2 domains and 20 billion worth of cultivation resources as a gift. Unexpectedly, Yi Qing said a lot of hypocrisy. After beating around the bush, he demanded an exorbitant price. He actually wanted the territories of 10 regions and cultivation resources worth hundreds of billions. The Golden Dragon region master's offer was 5 times the price. Most importantly, the Golden Dragon region master understood Yi Qing's nature. He knew that the latter was insatiably greedy, cunning, and shameless. Even if he gritted his teeth and agreed to Yi Qing's terms, Yi Qing would definitely add more rewards and other conditions. In short, Yi Qing would definitely take advantage of this opportunity to ruthlessly extort a large sum of money from him. The Golden Dragon region master was filled with rage. He hated and despised Yi Qing. However, he did not immediately reject the offer and chose to put this matter aside for now. After thinking about it, he decided to send another message to Jing Feihong to discuss the specific countermeasures. Feihong, my brother, this time in the Golden Dragon Abyss, Tianxing has 2 more Divine Kings by his side. A big guy at the 4th level of the Divine King realm and a woman at the 1st level of the Divine King realm. They have the advantage in numbers, and their combat strength has greatly increased. They are full of cunning. I'm afraid that it will be difficult for the 2 of us to deal with them, let alone kill Tianxing for revenge. I think that we should think of a way to get the help of other region masters and divine kings. Only then will it be possible. After about 15 minutes, Jing Feihong sent back a message. The Golden Dragon region master hurriedly received the message jade slip and read its contents. Jing Feihong said in a low voice, "Brother Long, you are absolutely right. Tianxing is not only full of cunning, but the divine arts and secret techniques he has mastered are also very exquisite and strange. It is impossible to guard against them. I was previously heavily injured and only recently came out of seclusion after recovering from my injuries. I am currently thinking of a way to take revenge. With the 2 of us, it is indeed impossible to kill them. However, I have a good idea. I would like to share it with Brother Long for your consideration. The foreign divine kings have invaded our territory and killed the innocent. They are tyrannical and tyrannical. We should report this matter to the Azura God Emperor and let the God Emperor deal with it. However, the God Emperor has never shown himself, and he is so high and mighty. If we trouble him with such a small matter, it will make us look incompetent. However, the God Emperor has a group of inspectors under his command. They are called the Haotian oracles. Usually, the Haotian oracles replace the God Emperor to patrol the hundreds of regions in the Haotian continent and deal with all kinds of complicated matters. The Haotian oracles are honorable. They represent the God Emperor in person and are qualified to mobilize the military forces of all regions. In addition, each Haotian oracles is a middle-level divine king with super strong combat power. Coincidentally, a Haotian oracles entered the San Chuan region a month ago and seemed to be investigating an unsolved case. We can jointly report to the Haotian oracles and ask him to help us solve it. After reading the contents of the Jade Slip, the Golden Dragon region master's eyes suddenly lit up and he became excited. Yes. Why didn't I think of that? We can't disturb the Azura God Emperor, but we can ask the Haotian oracles for help. The Haotian oracles patrol the world and are responsible for maintaining the stability of all regions and dealing with all kinds of conflicts and contradictions. It is best to ask the Haotian oracles for this kind of thing. No matter how strong Tianxing is, it is impossible for him to go against the Haotian oracles. No matter how the Haotian oracles punish him, he must accept it obediently. Otherwise, he is despising and rebelling against the Azura God Emperor, which is equivalent to rebellion. That is definitely a dead end, ha 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 ha. The Golden Dragon region master murmured to himself. The haze in his heart was swept away and he became energetic again. He did not waste any more time and quickly sent a message to Jing Feihong to agree to the proposal and discuss the specific details. Soon, the two of them sent a message to the Haotian oracles in the San Chuan region to report the situation and ask for his help. Chapter 3387. Unknowingly, 10 days had passed. Yank, Chao Qingyu, Lan and the rest recuperated in the divine ship for 10 days. Their injuries and divine power had all recovered. As for Ji Tianxing, he had already been in seclusion for 500 days in the distorted spacetime. During this period, he first refined Divine King Qiu Lian's divine spark fragment and greatly increased his strength. He also obtained dozens of divine Dao laws. Next, he went into seclusion to cultivate the heaven-punishing divine art. He had been comprehending and cultivating the third level of the cultivation method. After breaking through to the Divine King realm, the second level of the heaven-punishing divine art was perfected. He could only explore and comprehend the third level of the cultivation method to quickly increase his strength. Fortunately, after thousands of attempts and deductions, he successfully comprehended the third level of the cultivation method. Although he had been in seclusion for half a year, he had only just entered the third level of the cultivation method. Even so, it allowed his strength to increase significantly. When he ended his seclusion, his strength had already reached the peak of the first level of the Divine King realm. He was just one step away from breaking through to the second level of the Divine King realm. However, every level of the Divine King realm was extremely difficult to break through. It was 10 times more difficult than the Divine Lord realm. This was not something that could be solved by seclusion. It required the corresponding opportunity. In addition, the number of divine Dao laws that Ji Tianxing had grasped successfully reached as many as 380. Compared to before he went into seclusion, his combat strength doubled again. Moreover, the Bloody Flame Sacred Tree only took 5 days to successfully transform into a king-level sacred tree. After breaking through to king level, the Bloody Flame Sacred Tree underwent a huge change. Not only did the sacred tree grow to 15,000 feet, but the area covered by billions of branches and leaves also reached a radius of 3,000 miles. At least 20% of the branches grew purple leaves. There were also many branches that bore purple divine fruits. The divine fire surrounding the sacred tree was even more turbulent. The aura it emitted was also more vigorous. The benefits to everyone were even greater. Yun Yaro, Ji Ku, Bai Long, Wu Shuang, Zhen Hong, and the rest, the effects of their seclusion cultivation under the sacred tree had also doubled. As a result, Yun Yaro and Ji Ku reached the 9th level of the Divine Lord Realm one after another. White Dragon and Zhen Hong had also grown to become high divine lords. Even Black Dragon and Qian Yu had rapidly grown, their strength reaching around the 6th level of the Divine Lord realm. Ji Tianxing was deeply gratified by everyone's rapid growth. His family and friends, as well as his many followers, had all become experts and experts. In this life, he would gradually build up his forces and restore the glory of the past. In fact, he would even make his forces even stronger than before. Only then would he be qualified to take revenge on the 5 god emperors. Shua. With a flash of divine light, Ji Tianxing left the 9 Heavens 10 Extremes pagoda and returned to the reef. He looked at the divine pagoda lying quietly on the reef and then observed the reef island. He couldn't help but frown. For 10 whole days, no one has come to this reef island, and no one has discovered the existence of the divine tower. This shouldn't be the case. Even if this place is very remote and doesn't have any mines or gems, there should be many divine lords searching for king-level divine objects in this area. Ji Tianxing vaguely felt that something was wrong. These 10 days had been too peaceful. But he couldn't figure out why, so he called out to Chao Qingyu and Yank in the divine battleship. Yank, Chao Qingyu, and Lana had long ended their seclusion and were meditating. After hearing Ji Tianxing's call, Yank and Chao Qingyu left the divine battleship and appeared in front of him. Lana remained in the divine battleship's secret chamber and continued to cultivate. In the past, she had always felt that after breaking through to the divine king realm, she would reach the peak of the divine path and be able to accompany Chao Qingyu to travel the world until they grew old. However, the encounters in the past few months made her realize that breaking through to the divine king realm was only the starting point to reach the peak of the divine path. If she wanted to live safely and resolve all the dangers she encountered, her strength was far from enough. Therefore, she had to work even harder to cultivate and increase her strength. Ji Tianxing sized up Yank and Chao Qingyu. Seeing that their injuries had healed, he said, "Since you've recovered, I have nothing to worry about. Let's go, we'll continue searching for king-level divine objects." Previously, we sensed the aura of a king-level divine object on a reef island. We were about to investigate but were stopped by the Golden Dragon Emperor and the others. In the blink of an eye, we've been delayed for 10 days. I hope that the group of divine lords who arrived first haven't found the divine object. If everyone competed and searched fairly, Ji Tianxing wouldn't be afraid no matter how many opponents there were. But now, they were 10 days later than the dozens of divine lords. The difference was too great. He was very worried that the divine lords had already found the divine object. Yank waved his fist and said fiercely, "As long as those guys haven't left the abyss, even if they have found the divine object, I can take it back." Ji Tianxing smiled and didn't say anything. He led Yank and Chao Qingyu and flew into the depths of the lava sea. About an hour later, the 3 of them flew for 200,000 miles and arrived at a purple-brown reef island. The reef island had a radius of 100 miles and the height above the surface of the lava sea was about 1,000 feet. Previously, Ji Tianxing had detected the aura of the king-level divine object on this reef island. At that time, there were traces of divine lord activity on this reef island, as well as mineral veins and many gems. But now, when Ji Tianxing and the other 2 landed on the reef island, they found that the situation had changed. Not only were there many cracks and pits on the reef island, but the colorful mineral veins and gems were also gone. There was even a ravine that was 1,000 feet long and several hundred feet deep in the middle of the reef island. Everyone knew at a glance that an intense battle had taken place on this reef island. However, they searched the entire reef island but couldn't find a single divine lord expert. There wasn't even a single divine emperor's corpse. There were only some scattered sabers, swords, and armor fragments. Ji Tianxing searched carefully and found that the aura of the king-level divine object had also disappeared. Such a situation made him frown. Yank asked tentatively, "Young master, could it be that the group of divine lords found the king-level divine object here and caused a fight? After an intense battle, someone took the king-level divine object and escaped from this reef island?" Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "It's possible. Therefore, those divine lords left the reef island to pursue the person who took the divine object. However, this is just a guess. Let's look at another reef island." As he spoke, Ji Tianxing pointed to the southwest. If they flew in that direction for 80,000 miles, they would arrive at a reef island with a larger area. However, that reef island was the last island in this area. If they continued to travel for tens of thousands of miles, they would reach the end of the lava sea. It was blocked by endless rock strata. That was their last hope. Swoosh, swoosh. Therefore, Ji Tianxing led Yank and Chao Qingyu across the lava sea at lightning speed and rushed to the reef island. Chapter 3388. Not long after, Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu, and Chao Qingyu landed on the last reef island. The reef island, which had a radius of more than 200 miles, was also covered in purplish-brown reefs. There were almost no gems or ore veins. Similarly, the island was also covered in cracks and deep pits. There were also countless broken rocks and weapon remains scattered around. The three of them covered the entire reef island with their divine senses, but they could not find a single Sir God. The current situation was similar to that of the previous island. Yang Ku was filled with disappointment. His tone was somewhat resentful as he said, "That group of despicable thieves actually took advantage of the time when we were recuperating to steal the king-level divine object. Young master, let's hurry to the exit of the abyss. As long as we block the exit, we won't have to worry about not getting the divine object." Ji Tianxing frowned and said earnestly, "Until now, we don't even know what the divine object is. It's a little arbitrary to jump to conclusions. Moreover, blocking the exit of the abyss will definitely incur the wrath of the masses. I'm thinking about two other questions. Why are there dozens of Sir Gods here, but not a single one of them is here? Also, the reef island is very hard. Probably only the power of a godly king can destroy it. Even if those dozens of Sir Gods fought, they couldn't have damaged the reef island to this extent. There's a problem here." "Ah!" Yank was startled and scratched his head in confusion. Chao Qingyu suddenly thought of something and reminded, "Young master, didn't you say that the seal of the Golden Dragon Abyss only opens once every 100 years and that it only lasts for 2 months each time? It's been more than 50 days since the seal opened. In about 3 to 5 days, the seal of the Golden Dragon Abyss will close. I think those Sir Gods also calculated the time. Regardless of whether they got the divine object or not, they must have left as soon as possible. As for the destruction of the 2 reef islands, maybe a godly king appeared, stole the king-level divine object, and was besieged by many Sir Gods. Did the 2 sides engage in a fierce battle before the reef island was reduced to this state?" Ji Tianxing thought for a while and nodded slightly. "Yes, your deduction is quite reasonable. However, there are only 2 Sir Gods in the Golden Dragon domain. They are the Golden Dragon domain master and his wife. Besides them, which other Sir Gods would come here to steal the divine object? Furthermore, we were fighting in the direction we came from. If a divine king powerhouse passed by, it's impossible for us to not detect it, right?" This. Chao Qingyu was speechless. He didn't know how to explain. Right at this moment, Yang Ku suddenly exclaimed in surprise. His face was filled with surprise and joy. "Young master, I found it. It was still there. It's still there." Ji Tianxing and Chao Qingyu's thoughts were interrupted. They both turned to look at him with inquiring eyes. "What's still there? What did you find?" Yank pointed to the southwest of the island and said excitedly, "Just now, I used the Golden Cloud Earth technique to check. 20,000 feet underground, there is the aura of a king-level divine object in the rock stratum. It seems like there are 2 king-level divine stones. Young master, the king-grade divine artifact is still here. We didn't work for nothing." When Ji Tianxing and Chao Qingyu heard this, they were pleasantly surprised. Without waiting for Ji Tianxing's order, Yank used the Golden Cloud Earth technique. His entire body lit up with a dark yellow divine light. With a whoosh, he burrowed into the ground. The reefs were extremely hard. Even Ji Tianxing and Chao Qingyu had a hard time moving through them. Their speed could only reach about 300 feet per breath. Yank used the Golden Cloud Earth technique to move through the rock stratum like a fish in water. It was as if there were no obstacles. In every breath, he could dive 5,000 feet underground. His speed was astonishing. In just 4 short breaths, Yank had reached a depth of 20,000 feet and was close to the 2 divine stones. Since Yank had gone down, Ji Tianxing didn't have to go down himself. He and Chao Qingyu stayed on the island and used their divine sense to observe Yank's situation. 20,000 feet underground, in the purplish-brown rock stratum, there were indeed 2 divine stones that were as red as fire. Interestingly, the 2 divine stones were very big. They were as big as a house and had a diameter of about 10 meters. Moreover, the 2 divine stones were round and of the same size. They were about 300 feet apart from each other. Ji Tianxing and Chao Qingyu couldn't help but wonder what kind of divine stones they were. How could they be so big? The shape was very regular, and the size was also very uniform. This was too strange. At this moment, something unexpected happened. The sea of lava around the reef island, which was originally calm, suddenly began to surge violently. With a loud rumbling sound, the sea of lava surged with giant waves that were dozens of feet high. 7-colored divine fire gushed out of them. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. The endless 7-colored divine fire gushed out of the sea of lava and covered the sky for hundreds of miles. In the blink of an eye, the dazzling 7-colored divine fire had sealed off the entire reef island and formed a huge shield. The reef island was sealed off by the 7-colored divine light shield. Gradually, it became impossible to see what was happening outside. As the divine fire gushed out of the sea of lava, the 7-colored divine light shield became thicker and thicker, and its defensive power doubled. The sudden change startled Ji Tianxing and Chao Qingyu. They frowned. Chao Qingyu reflexively drew her divine sword and scanned her surroundings warily. Ji Tianxing was concerned about Yank's situation. He quickly looked at the underground rock stratum. At the same time, the 2 divine stones in the rock stratum began to move. The entire reef island shook violently. Countless cracks appeared on the ground, and countless rocks flew out. Yank was also shocked. He didn't dare to dig any more divine stones. He quickly escaped from the underground as fast as he could. Swoosh. He moved even faster. In just 3 breaths, he was back in front of Ji Tianxing. Huff. 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 Young master, those aren't divine stones, they're eyes. Yank gasped for breath and shouted. Eyes. Ji Tianxing's eyes narrowed. He immediately understood what Yank meant. You mean there's a divine king ferocious beast underground? The 2 divine stones we saw were actually its eyes. Yank nodded. Only now did Ji Tianxing come to a realization, and said, so that's how it is. No wonder the 2 divine stones were so big and the size was the same. Before he could finish his words, a deafening roar came from underground. The entire reef island shook violently. Countless cracks appeared on the ground, and lava and divine fire gushed out. No one could stand on the island anymore. Ji Tianxing and the other 2 could only fly into the sky. The 3 of them took out their divine weapons and looked down at the cracking reef island, waiting for the ferocious beast to appear. Although the world had changed, and the entire reef island was sealed off from the outside world, they were still fearless. They weren't in a hurry to escape. They also wanted to see what kind of ferocious beast was hiding under the reef island. The Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 3389. Rumble. Kacha. Kacha. A series of loud noises could be heard, mixed with the sound of the reef island shattering. Under the gaze of Ji Tianxing and the other 2, a huge ravine appeared in the middle of the reef island, and a 30-mile-wide crater appeared. Endless smoke and gravel rose into the air, and raging lava and the 7-colored divine fire splashed out from the crater. Dong. Dong. The first thing to emerge from the crater were 2 huge purple claws. The 2 claws looked like the claws of a dragon. Not only were they thick and sharp, but they were also covered with fine scales. Moreover, the 2 claws were huge, and each of them was equivalent to a palace. Could it be a divine dragon? Or a red earth dragon that lives in the lava of the earth's core? Even if this beast isn't a divine dragon, it might have the bloodline of a dragon. Its divine power is very violent. Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu, and Yank were all guessing what the beast was. Then, a huge purple-brown head poked out of the deep pit. Swoosh. Seeing the 7-colored divine fire around the head, Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu, and Yank were all stunned. It's not a divine dragon. What kind of monster is this? Why does its head look like a bull's? Indeed, That gigantic head had nothing to do with a divine dragon. At first glance, it did look more like a bull's head. There was a sharp bull horn on each side of its triangular head. The two pairs of huge red eyes were also surrounded by raging flames, and they were bloodthirsty and cruel. It stared at Ji Tianxing and the other two as it slowly crawled out of the crater. When it completely emerged from the crater and appeared in the sky above the reef island, Ji Tianxing and the other two finally saw what it looked like. They saw that this purple-brown beast with 7-colored divine fire around it was more than 20 miles long and thousands of feet tall. It had the head of a cow, the body of a tiger, and the tail of a scorpion with barbs. His entire body was covered in thick hair, but each strand was like a long spear, burning with fierce divine flames. With such a huge beast occupying the sky above the reef island, Ji Tianxing and the other two felt a huge sense of oppression. It was like a mountain, a volcano that was spewing flames and could erupt at any moment. Yank studied the beast and narrowed his eyes. He said in a low voice, "This beast is at the peak of the fourth divine king realm. It's even stronger than me. Moreover, this is his home ground. His combat power is definitely several times stronger than mine. It's probably going to be a little hard to deal with, right?" Chao Qingyu nodded in agreement and asked in a puzzled tone, "What kind of dire beast is this? Why haven't I seen it before?" Ji Tianxing said calmly, "This is the Kai Fei, a ferocious beast from ancient times. It lives in the depths of the Earth's core. Normally, it can only be seen in places where lava accumulates. However, this Kai Fei in front of us is different from the ordinary Kai Fei. Its lifespan should be more than 30,000 years. It's an ancient species that has lived since ancient times. Looking at its appearance and the attributes of its divine power, it must have fused with the 7-colored divine fire and lava, and its power has mutated. This beast is much more ferocious than the red earth dragon. It's really hard to deal with." After listening to his explanation, Yank and Chao Qingyu finally understood. Their expressions and eyes became even more serious. At this time, the Kai Fei's gaze swept across Ji Tianxing and the other two. After seeing their cultivation realms, it was obviously excited. It raised its head and laughed loudly, "Ha ha ha ha. God is so kind to me. I didn't expect that after 1,000 years, another divine king realm prey would fall into my trap. And this time, there are 3 of them." Probably because it was too excited, the Kai Fei shook its head, stretched out its front paws, and said excitedly, "Originally, the 2 months were almost up, and I was almost full. I was about to go into seclusion and hibernate. I didn't expect that in these last few days, you would take the initiative to deliver yourselves to me. This prince really wants to thank all of you for delivering such a delicious meal." As it spoke, the Kai Fei stretched out its long black tongue and licked its big mouth greedily. It seemed that in its eyes, Ji Tianxing, Yank, and Chao Qingyu were all delicious food. Yank felt a strong sense of contempt. He flew into a rage and was about to teach the Kai Fei a lesson. Ji Tianxing stretched out his hand to stop him. He stared at the Kai Fei and asked, "Kai Fei, from what you're saying, the appearance of the golden dragon abyss is related to you. Also, every 100 years, the divine flame seal of the abyss will open. Is that also your intention?" The Kai Fei's eyes narrowed. His gaze locked onto Ji Tianxing, and he sneered mockingly. "That's right. All of this is my plan." "You guessed right." "What? Do you want to hear my plan and understand the inside story and the truth?" Ji Tianxing had a rough idea, but he didn't know much about it. He remained silent, indicating his tacit agreement. The Kai Fei sneered, "Ha ha ha ha. You're just my food. Be a good boy and wait to be eaten by me. What right do you have to ask so many questions?" Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and smiled mockingly. "Anyway, you've already sealed off this reef island. We don't plan to leave this place. Moreover, the 2 months are almost up. Everyone has left the abyss. Now, we're probably the only ones left in this abyss. What are you afraid of? Why don't we chat? I'm sure you've been hiding here for a long time. You must be bored, right?" The Kai Fei frowned and thought for a moment. He couldn't help but nod. "I have to say, you're quite smart. What you say makes a lot of sense. Also, your divine soul and bloodline are very special. They have a taste that I desire very much. I'm merciful. I'll waste some time and let you know the reason for your death. Although Yang and Chao Qingyu's strength and realm were higher than Ji Tianxing's, it was an ancient beast. He could clearly sense that Ji Tianxing's bloodline and divine soul were more powerful and noble. Kai Fei was an ancient beast. If he swallowed Ji Tianxing's divine soul and bloodline, his potential would be stimulated. His talent and strength would be greatly improved. Therefore, he was willing to waste more time chatting with Ji Tianxing. As early as 10,000 years ago, this king had arrived at this magma sea and occupied this area. At first, there were countless fire spirits, fire demons, and all kinds of beasts. There was even a crimson fire earth dragon. However, this king had almost eaten all of them. Until 1,000 years ago, 2 divine kings fell from the sky and smashed through several thousand miles of rock stratum. They were on their last breaths and waiting for death. I was alarmed and left the lava sea. I passed through the rock stratum to check the situation. I didn't expect that many gods would be attracted by the huge commotion. They wanted to snatch the treasures of those 2 divine kings. However, in my eyes, they were all sumptuous food. Therefore, this king ate all of them, including the 2 god kings. From then on, I thought of an idea. I broke through the rock stratum and connected it to the lava sea, forming an abyss. Chapter 3390. Kai Fei's narration confirmed Ji Tianxing's conjecture. Without waiting for Kai Fei to finish, Ji Tianxing continued, "In the past, you hid in the underground magma sea and only knew how to devour the living beings in the magma sea. After you devoured the remains of the divine king and the numerous divine lords, you realized that the power they provided was richer and stronger. Therefore, you took the opportunity to create this golden dragon abyss, allowing countless divine lords to enter the underground magma sea. Because you know that the divine race has a strong curiosity and will definitely explore the situation at the bottom of the abyss. You also know that the divine race is greedy, so they scattered all kinds of divine stones, mineral veins, and gemstones in the depths of the Earth's core to the various reef islands. A few lucky ones would obtain treasures, and the news would spread, attracting even more divine lords to explore the area. Therefore, countless divine lords became your food, providing nourishment for you to increase your strength. Am I right?" Kai Fei nodded and sneered mockingly. "That's right. Kid, you are smart, your guess is completely correct. But this is not all. This king also knows the principle of rare things being valuable. If this abyss is always open, it will lose its attraction. Usually, this king uses divine fire to seal the entrance to the abyss, and it will only open once every 100 years. In this way, every time the entrance to the abyss opens, it will be a grand event for the divine race, and at least 10,000 people will flock over. In addition, those people can come in at any time, and will endlessly disturb this king's cultivation. Every 100 years, this king will catch all of them in one fell swoop and eat heartily. Then, this king can sleep peacefully for 100 years, slowly digesting the power they provide. Those divine race clearly know that there is a slim chance of survival in the abyss, but they still come wave after wave, in an endless stream. Kid, don't you think that they are greedy beyond measure, and seek death in a righteous manner?" Ji Tianxing shook his head and said indifferently, "In this world, there are thousands of races, and all living beings want to reach the peak of the divine path. All divine spirits think that they are strong, and can dictate the life and death of others, and treat others as prey. But in reality, anyone can be a hunter, but they are also prey in the eyes of others. If those divine lords kill you, you will be the prey. Unfortunately, they weren't strong enough, so they became your food." Kai Fei thought about it seriously and couldn't help but nod. "What you said makes sense. It seems to be the case." After a pause, its eyes suddenly lit up. It stared at Ji Tianxing with a playful look and asked, "What? You seem to be implying something. Do you really think that the 3 of you can kill this king and turn this king into your food? What a joke. Ha 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 ha." Kai Fei laughed contemptuously, his tone full of confidence and arrogance. "All right, this king's story is over. You can all die in peace." As soon as he finished speaking, Kai Fei raised his mountain-like front claws and slammed them towards Ji Tianxing and the other 2 like Mount Tai. A formless, terrifying pressure enveloped the 3 of them, causing them to feel as if they were stuck in a quagmire, and their movements became sluggish. The three of them were about to be hit by Kai Fei's giant claws and be smashed into pieces on the spot. At the critical moment, Ji Tianxing was fearless. He made a sword gesture with both hands and used a divine skill that he hadn't used for a long time. Sword rain. As he shouted coldly, tens of thousands of silver light spots appeared above everyone's heads, like stars falling from the sky. A total of more than 26,000 starry giant swords, with an indestructible and destructive momentum, poured down on the reef island. Yank and Chao Qingyu didn't dare to hesitate. They desperately burst out with their fastest speed and retreated to the sides. In the next moment, Kai Fei's two giant claws slammed down, and the two of them barely dodged. Ji Tianxing's figure was covered by the giant claws, and it seemed that he couldn't escape. But at the critical moment, his figure suddenly became transparent and merged with the surrounding heaven and earth. Kaboom! In the earth-shattering sound, Kai Fei's claws slammed hard on the ground. The ground was already fragmented, and two huge deep pits were formed on the spot. The entire reef island was torn apart, and endless gravel splashed out. Kai Fei was stunned. It raised a pair of front claws and stared gloomily at the ruins, searching for Ji Tianxing's trace. It couldn't believe that Ji Tianxing, who was supposed to be dead for sure, suddenly disappeared. Moreover, he disappeared right under its nose. It released its divine sense to search around, but it couldn't find where Ji Tianxing was hiding, and it couldn't see through Ji Tianxing's invisibility technique. This was too strange. In fact, Ji Tianxing didn't use the invisibility technique at all, but the infinite sky of chaos. He merged with heaven and earth within 100,000 miles. He was everywhere, but he didn't really exist. Unless Kai Fei could destroy heaven and earth within 100,000 miles, it would be impossible to kill Ji Tianxing. Otherwise, it couldn't do anything to Ji Tianxing. Just as Kai Fei was in a daze, 26,000 starry giant swords poured down and hit the seven-colored light shield with endless divine power. Bang, bang, bang. A series of deafening noises burst out, reverberating between heaven and earth for tens of thousands of miles. The light shield formed by Kai Fei's seven-colored divine fire was extremely solid and had very strong defensive power. However, the 20,000 starry giant swords were as dense as raindrops. After a series of fierce attacks, dense cracks appeared on the light shield. Then, the starry greatsword continued to bombard the light shield, blasting holes in it. With cracking sounds, the seven-colored light shield was soon fragmented, and countless divine light fragments were scattered. Without the seven-colored light shield, the 20,000 starry giant swords immediately sealed off the area within 1,000 miles and started to attack Kai Fei fiercely. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The 10,000 starry giant swords split the sky and dazzled the divine light. Kai Fei was completely drowned by the sword light. Although its skin was rough and its flesh was thick, and its body was as sturdy as a king-level divine stone and divine armor. However, as more than 10,000 starry swords continued to bombard its body, deafening booms could be heard. Its body was trembling and it kept crying out in pain. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Ji Tianxing used the power of heaven and earth within 100,000 miles to use all kinds of divine skills to attack Kai Fei. Heavenly Dragon Slash. Sky-breaking sword. Dragon Elephant Divine Fist. The sea of lava around the reef island kept bursting with powerful divine light shadows, attacking Kai Fei's vital parts. Kai Fei was a little flustered and could only take a defensive stance. But even so, it was only able to defend for 10 breaths before it was injured by Ji Tianxing. More than a dozen hideous wounds appeared on its mountain-like body, and blood kept flowing out. Kai Yang was both shocked and angry. He roared with murderous intent, "Reptile, get out here for this king. Come out if you have the guts. Don't hide. If you don't come out, I'll kill your companions first." Kai Fei saw through Ji Tianxing's tactic and guessed that he would hide and not come out, so it targeted Yank and Chao Qingyu. Ji Tianxing was not easy to deal with, so it would start with the two of them. Chapter 3391. Ji Tianxing was the main force against Kai Fei. He controlled more than 20,000 starry swords to form the heaven-destroying sword formation and used all his strength to suppress and kill Kai Fei. Yank and Chao Qingyu assisted from the side, constantly using their mystiques to attack Kai Fei's vital points. Unfortunately, Kai Fei's body was too special. It was almost made up of all kinds of god stones, and its defense was terrifyingly strong. Even with Yank and Chao Qingyu's experience and eyesight, they could not find Kai Fei's weakness and could only attack its vital points. However, the results were minimal. They used all their mystiques and ultimate skills, but they could only cause some minor injuries to Kai Fei. Now that Kai Fei was enraged, he stopped searching for Ji Tianqing's traces and turned his attention to the two of them. A pair of mountain-like front claws smashed down on Yank and Chao Qingyu. The broken reef island was smashed into countless pieces of rock and was drowned by the waves of lava. Kai Fei opened his mouth and spat out endless divine fire. Like a flood, the fire swept across 1,000 miles and filled the entire heaven-destroying sword formation. Yank and Chao Qingyu were under immense pressure. They could only use all their strength to resist Kai Fei's attacks. They kept retreating, not daring to face him head-on. The two of them were beaten to the point of retreating step by step. They were sent flying by Kai Fei one after another. They spat out blood as they fell into the sea of lava. Ji Tianqing immediately used all his strength and used his most powerful mystique. Sword of Destruction. He madly absorbed the power of the five elements world and released a huge divine sword that was hundreds of miles long. It slashed toward Kai Fei. Compared to the world slash, this mystique used double the power of the world. Its power was even more terrifying and could truly destroy the world. Kai Fei was chasing after Yank and Chao Qingyu. He only wanted to kill them as soon as possible. However, Ji Tianqing took the opportunity to find a flaw and launched a sneak attack from behind. When Kai Fei realized that something was wrong and wanted to dodge, it was already too late. Its body was too big, almost half the size of the reef island. It was too difficult to dodge in the blink of an eye. Therefore, it desperately shrank its body, and its body shrank 100 times in an instant. After all, the bigger the body, the bigger the target. Unfortunately, even if it shrank 100 times, it was still a mile long and hundreds of feet tall. The giant divine sword that could split heaven and earth slashed down and drowned out its figure. Kaboom! This loud sound was truly earth-shattering and earth-shattering. The magma sea within a radius of 50,000 miles was shaken by the huge waves, shaking violently. In the end, the Crimson Mantis was unable to dodge that sword strike and was actually hacked into the sea of magma. The giant sword cut open its hard back, creating a huge crack and cutting off one of its left front legs. Blood that was dark red like magma gushed out of the wound and poured into the sea of magma. The heart-wrenching pain made Kai Fei roar at the sky. Its voice was particularly miserable. It was so furious that it wanted nothing more than to tear Ji Tianqing into pieces and swallow him alive. However, Ji Tianqing had been in a state of disappearance. It could not find him at all, but it could clearly feel his aura everywhere. Kai Fei did not understand what was going on, but he did not want to waste time on it. He had to kill Yank and Chao Qingyu as quickly as possible with the most brutal means to ease the anger in his heart. Go to hell! Kai Fei roared crazily and released thousands of divine fire light pillars at Yank and Chao Qingyu. Boom! 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 More than 6,000 divine fire light pillars rained down on the lava sea within a radius of 1,000 miles like cannonballs. Although Chao Qingyu and Yank tried their best to dodge, the divine fire light pillars were too dense. In less than 2 breaths' time, Chao Qingyu was hit by a divine fire light pillar. Covered in flames, it was smashed into the surging lava sea. Yank had dodged the divine fire light pillars, but he was hit by Kai Fei's tail. The sharp barbs on the scarlet pheasant's tail tore the armor he wore into pieces, and a huge wound appeared on his waist and abdomen. Blood splattered. Yank let out a painful groan. After flying dozens of miles, he fell into the lava sea. Kai Fei followed up with another attack. He teleported and spat out scorching divine fire light pillar from his mouth. He wanted to burn Yank to ashes. It seemed that Chao Qingyu and Yank were in a perilous situation. Both of them were seriously injured. They couldn't resist Kai Fei's ferocious attacks at all. Ji Tianqing had no choice but to deactivate the infinite turbid sky and rush out of the lava sea to block Kai Fei's attack. Swoosh! With a flash of divine light, Ji Tianxing teleported to Yank's side. Just as the divine fire light pillar was about to engulf Yank, Ji Tianxing used the Great Protection technique and formed an oval shield. The shield of golden light with a radius of 300 feet wrapped around him and Yank. Boom! An earth-shaking explosion rang out as the shield was blasted away, smashing hundreds of miles away. However, the shield's defense was extremely strong. It didn't have any cracks or gaps. After flying hundreds of miles away, Ji Tianxing neutralized the force of the impact and stopped in midair with Yank. Yank was quite surprised. He heaved a long sigh of relief, as if he had just survived a disaster. He had thought that Chao Qingyu and Ji Tianxing were closer. When he and Chao Qingyu were in danger, Ji Tianxing would definitely save Chao Qingyu. He didn't expect, he was both surprised and touched. At this moment, Ji Tianxing shouted coldly, "Why are you in a daze? Hurry up and heal your wounds." "Oh, oh." Yank came to his senses and hurriedly retreated further away to heal his wounds. Kai Fei was stunned for a moment. Then, he laughed menacingly. "Ha ha ha ha. You bastard, are you finally willing to come out? Die." From the beginning, Kai Fei's main target had been Ji Tianxing. Not only was Ji Tianxing the most despicable, but also because his soul and bloodline were more attractive to Kai Fei. Chasing after Chao Qingyu and Yank was also to force Ji Tianxing to show himself. Now that Ji Tianxing had appeared, he had achieved his goal. Naturally, he attacked even more ferociously. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Kai Fei waved his claws and fangs in a frenzy. He waved his barbed tail and attacked Ji Tianxing. Endless divine fire also spewed out from his bloody mouth. It poured down like a torrential flood towards Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing used his left hand to conjure a spell to control the heaven-destroying sword formation to kill Kai Fei. His right hand held the sword of burial of heaven. He used all kinds of abhijna and ultimate skills to fight Kai Fei. All kinds of abhijna and secret spells clashed violently between heaven and earth. There was a huge explosion that shook the 9 heavens. Boom, 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 boom. Within a short period of time, Ji Tianxing and Kai Fei had exchanged more than 300 blows and chased each other around the heaven-destroying sword formation. The destructive shockwaves overturned the sea of lava within 1,000 miles. Chao Qingyu and Yank could only retreat outside the heaven-destroying sword formation. After treating their wounds, they quickly returned to the heaven-destroying sword formation to continue the battle. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3392. In this way, the situation within the sword formation became Ji Tianxing and the other 2 joining forces to besiege the Kai Yang. Ji Tianxing was the main force. He was the most ferocious and gave Kai Fei the most pressure. Yank and Chao Qingyu assisted Kai Fei by attacking Kai Fei from both sides. Bam bam bam. Rumble. Both parties moved around in the sword formation and unleashed all kinds of secret skills. They clashed fiercely and made a series of loud noises. In the beginning, Kai Fei was able to resist the attacks of the 3 with its strong defense and vigorous divine power. However, it was severely injured and did not have the chance to treat its injuries. Its divine blood kept flowing out and its power was declining rapidly. It could absorb the power of the sea of lava to replenish its divine power. However, Ji Tianxing set up the heaven punishment sword formation and sealed off the area within a 1,000-mile radius, isolating the sword formation from the outside. Kai Fei absorbed all the power of the sea of lava in the sword formation and could not replenish its divine power. As a result, its power was being depleted rapidly and it could not replenish its divine power. Its combat power was declining rapidly. It was in a passive situation. It was defending more than attacking and its injuries were getting worse. If nothing changed and things continued like this, it could already foresee the outcome. Therefore, it returned to its original size and used its mountain-like body to crash into the heaven punishment sword formation. It ignored the attacks of the giant swords in the sky and exploded with the most ferocious power. It crashed into the light wall of the sword formation again and again. Bam! Bam bam! It wanted to break through the seal of the heaven punishment sword formation and escape from the sword formation. Once it returned to the vast sea of lava, it could quickly replenish its power and regain its powerful combat power. No matter how serious its injuries were, even if they were fatal, it could quickly recover. Moreover, if it could not defeat Ji Tianxing and the other two, it could dive into the sea of lava to escape. No one was more familiar with the sea of lava than it was. It was its territory and it was invincible. Ji Tianxing knew what Kai Fei was thinking. He slowed down his attacks and focused on increasing the power of the Heaven Punishment Sword formation. Originally, there were 10,000 starry giant swords forming the Heaven Punishment Sword formation and forming a sword light wall. The other 16,000 plus stellar swords formed a sword net and hurricane that covered the sky and earth, madly strangling the crimson pheasant. However, Ji Tianxing made a change. He increased the number of giant swords to the sword formation to 20,000. The remaining 6,000 or so swords formed the Six Dao's sword formation and tornadoes, continuously bombarding the scarlet pheasant. The defense of the heaven-destroying sword formation had been strengthened, and the scarlet pheasant's repeated attacks had no effect. Seizing this opportunity, Ji Tianxing, Yang Ku, and Chao Qingyu attacked the scarlet pheasant with all their might, firmly restraining it. Scarlet Pheasant had to defend against the attacks of the 3 and the 6,000 giant swords while casting spells to bombard the sword light barrier. Under such circumstances, it continued to attack for 15 minutes, but it was still unable to break through the heaven-destroying sword formation. It was helpless and resentful. It could only give up the idea of breaking the formation and focus on attacking Ji Tianxing and the other two. The crisis was resolved. Ji Tianxing and the other two then engaged in a fierce battle with Kai Yang, charging left and right in the sword formation. Time passed quickly. 2 hours, 4 hours, 6 hours. This was the longest battle Ji Tianxing and the others had ever fought since they entered the Golden Dragon Abyss. At the same time, their enemy was also the strongest and most difficult to deal with. Kai Fei was only at the peak of the 4th Heaven Divine King realm and was not as strong as the Golden Dragon Region Master. However, its combat power was much stronger than the Golden Dragon Region Master. This was the difference between an ordinary divine tribe and an ancient beast. Of course, Kai Fei was the overlord of the abyss. The Sea of Lava was its territory. This was also the main reason. 12 hours had passed and the battle was still not over. At this moment, not only was the strength of the scarlet pheasant greatly weakened, its combat strength had sharply decreased, and its entire body was riddled with scars. Even Ji Tianxing, Yang, and Chao Qingyu were weak and had many new wounds on their bodies. Their hair was disheveled, and their robes were stained with blood. Yang was the most severely injured, followed by Chao Qingyu. Ji Tianxing was the least injured. However, Kai Fei was the most severely injured and in the most dangerous situation. It only had about 50% of its strength left. It would be exhausted in another 4 to 6 hours. During this time, it tried to break through the Heaven Punishment Sword formation 3 times. Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing successfully neutralized it each time. It could not break free from the sword formation. After all, it was only a beast. It only had various divine skills and killing moves. It only had a superficial understanding of the divine tribe's techniques such as formations and weapon refinement. It had no idea how to break through the Heaven Punishment Sword formation. It could only rely on brute force. It had a premonition that if it did not escape from the Heaven Punishment Sword formation, it would be buried here today. Thus, it made a ruthless decision and used its trump card. Red Dragon Drill. Kai Fei burned its own divine blood and did not hesitate to consume 1,000 years' worth of power. It unleashed all its potential and doubled its combat power. Its entire body ignited with bloody flames that soared into the sky. Its gigantic body also began to swell, emitting a violent aura that could destroy the heavens and earth. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. Its body spun rapidly. It was like a flaming spear that was hundreds of miles long. It pointed at a certain spot on the sword formation's light wall and blasted it at its fastest speed. Obviously, Kai Fei wanted to use its divine body as a spear and the horn on its head as the blade. It wanted to break through the sword formation with its strongest force. Its charge was incomparably violent and unstoppable. Even Ji Tianxing did not dare to block it, let alone Yang and Chao Qingyu. Damn it! We can't let it escape from the sword formation. Once it escapes into the Sea of Lava, We won't be able to trap it or kill it. Ji Tianxing immediately frowned. His eyes flashed with deep worry. Yank and Chao Qingyu were also anxious, but there was nothing they could do. Kai Fei pierced through the sky like a flaming spear and rushed toward the sword formation's light wall. In a moment of desperation, Ji Tianxing could only draw on the power of the five elements world again and use his trump card. Celestial Dragon Overlord Body, Sword of Destruction, he shouted angrily. His body instantly expanded to a height of 10,000 feet and turned into a giant golden god. He held the Sword of Burial of Heaven with both hands and released endless power of the world. He slashed out a huge divine sword that was hundreds of miles long. This huge sword that could split heaven and earth slashed toward Kai Fei. It released a terrifying power that could destroy everything. However, Kai Fei's speed was extremely fast. It changed direction in an instant and deviated from its original trajectory. The Sword of Destruction did not hit Kai Fei directly. It only hit the back of the flaming spear, which was the back of Kai Fei's waist. Kaboom! In an earth-shattering sound, the Sword of Destruction suddenly collapsed. Hundreds of millions of sword-light fragments splashed out. The flaming spear was also cut in half. Kai Fei's two hind legs and tail were cut off by the huge sword on the spot. Although it let out a heart-wrenching cry, it still crashed into the sword formation's light wall without slowing down. It had made up its mind. Even if it was severely injured, it had to break through the sword formation's blockade to escape. Chapter 3393. Kaboom! With a deafening boom, the scarlet pheasant crashed into the light wall of the heaven-destroying sword formation. Even though it was severely injured and only had half of its body left, its hind legs and tail were gone. But its speed was extremely fast and its speed was extremely fast. Its impact was extremely powerful. As expected, it blasted a huge hole in the starry light wall of the heaven-destroying sword formation. Countless fragments of sword radiance burst out. Swoosh! When the divine light exploded, Kai Fei passed through the fragments of sword radiance and escaped from the heaven-destroying sword formation. Ha 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 ha! I'm finally free. Damned bastard, do you think you can trap this king? You're too naive. Kai Fei floated above the lava sea and turned to look at the huge hole in the heaven-destroying sword formation. It laughed proudly. The feeling of escaping from death made it very proud and relieved. Its mentality was also very relaxed. In its mind, Ji Tianxing's heaven-destroying sword formation had been broken and most of his divine power had been used up. It should not have any combat power left. When it returned to the magma sea, this vast and boundless magma sea was its most solid backing. If there was any danger, it could escape into the lava sea immediately and be safe. However, it never expected that Ji Tianxing would also chase it out immediately. Moreover, Ji Tianxing took advantage of its inattention to teleport in front of it and use a new divine power. Blade of Space-Time. He, who was 100 feet tall, held the 800 feet long burial of heaven tightly with both hands and used all his strength to slash out a ray of blazing white sword radiance. The huge white sword, which was thousands of feet long, released an invisible strong divine power and instantly enveloped Kai Fei. Kai Fei could clearly feel that the space within 100 miles around it had solidified. It was like a mosquito in an ice cube. Its body was stiff and it could not move at all. It could not even dodge, let alone escape into the lava sea. What was more terrifying was that it could even feel that the flow of time around it had become abnormally slow. It was at least 5 times slower than the normal flow of time. In other words, whether it was casting a spell to counterattack or trying to dodge, its speed would be 5 times slower than normal. At this moment, Kai Fei's laughter stopped abruptly, and his eyes were filled with fear and despair. Time. Space. You actually used space-time energy? Red Pheasant showed an incredulous look and roared in horror. To divine king powerhouses, grasping spatial power and laws was not something rare. 95% of the godly monarchs had grasped the spatial laws. They could teleport and traverse the void at will. However, time was one of the most mysterious and powerful forces in the world. 99% of god kings were unable to control the power of time. This had nothing to do with strength or realm. It was only related to talent, comprehension, and luck. Even if it was a peak divine king, without the corresponding lucky chance, it was also impossible to grasp the power of time. But Ji Tianxing did it. However, this was only a superficial use of the power of time, and it only slowed down the flow of time. However, this still made Kai Fei extremely shocked, and a deep sense of despair grew in his heart. It knew that it had been careless this time. It was probably doomed. At the same time of shock and despair, it was filled with regret. If time could be reversed, the moment it escaped the Heaven Extermination Sword formation, it would not have stopped and directly dived into the sea of lava. If that was the case, how could Ji Tianxing have the chance to use the power of time? Unfortunately, it was too late to say anything now. Boom. Crack. In the next instant, the space-time blade that was 10,000 feet long slashed fiercely onto Kai Fei, erupting with an earth-shattering bang. Its already incomplete body was split into two halves by the space-time blade on the spot, splattering blood all over the sky. What was even more terrifying was that the power of the space-time blade was completely released, and it was extremely violent and dazzling its body. Crack. 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 A series of crisp shattering sounds rang out. The two halves of Kai Fei's body actually collapsed into hundreds of millions of pieces and ignited with a blazing divine fire. Even its divine persona was struck by the space-time blade and collapsed on the spot. At this time, the power of the space-time blade was exhausted and gradually dissipated. Looking at the fragments and flowing fire scattered all over the sky, Ji Tianxing slowly put away the burial of Heaven's sword and murmured to himself, "I've been comprehending and cultivating the Heaven Extermination divine art for so long, and with the help of the power of distorting time and space, I was able to comprehend this space-time blade, and it became one of the top divine abilities I created. Originally, this divine ability was not mature and stable enough, and I wanted to improve it a little more before using it. I didn't expect that the first time I used it would be in such a sloppy situation. Fortunately, the power of this divine ability is extraordinary, and it didn't let me down. Indeed. In this life, whether it was talent, aptitude, strength, or foundation, he was much stronger than in his previous life. Of the thousands of divine abilities that he had mastered in his previous life, he only recultivated the most exquisite and powerful ones. Apart from that, he had to create even more powerful divine abilities and secret arts through his own comprehension. This space-time blade was the result of his nearly 10 years of research. Now that he was using it for the first time, the results were remarkable. Just as Ji Tianxing was distracted, Chao Qingyu and Yang's exclamations suddenly came from behind him. "Young master, what are you waiting for? Quickly refine it. Oh my God. It turns out that Kai Fei is the greatest treasure, and its body is the most precious resource and divine item." Ji Tianxing was awakened on the spot and hurriedly looked up at the sky. He saw that after Kai Fei's body collapsed, the billions of fragments, after being burned, released an endless torrent of divine power. The surging seven-colored divine fire, mixed with billions of colorful gems, as well as all kinds of divine gold and crystals, poured down like a flood. After Kai Fei died, its divine body actually disintegrated. It returned to its most primitive state, scattering endless divine power, divine fire, and gold, wanting to return to the magma sea. After all, it was born in the magma sea. It took tens of thousands of years to absorb endless power and gold to grow into its current state. Now that it was dead, it naturally returned to its original state. Ji Tianxing immediately understood. Without hesitation, he hurriedly stretched out his palms and released a surging devouring power. Swoosh! Two huge pitch-black vortexes formed, madly devouring the divine power, divine fire, and gold. Moreover, Ji Tianxing also released his divine consciousness, found Kai Fei's dozens of divine spark fragments, and put them into the interspatial ring. Next, he focused on devouring the flowing flames and golden stones that filled the sky, rapidly increasing his strength. Kai Fei's body was too big, and there were too many divine fire and gold scattered after it disintegrated. Ji Tianxing could not devour it all by himself, and he was not fast enough. Therefore, Chao Qingyu and Yang rushed up and used their ultimate skills to devour Kai Fei's power. Although their devouring speed could not compare to Ji Tianxing's, they quickly replenished their energy. However, they were able to quickly replenish their energy and increase their own strength, which also lessened Ji Tianxing's burden. Chapter 3394. Kai Fei's divine body was too huge. For tens of thousands of years, it had devoured a terrifying amount of divine power, divine fire, and metal stones. As a result, it took 3 days and 3 nights for the scattered power and metal stones to dissipate. Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu, and Yang also continued to devour divine fire and metal stones for 3 days and 3 nights without stopping. What was gratifying was that the divine fire and metal stones that filled the sky were the purest power and divine items. The 3 of them could directly devour and refine them without worrying about impure power. But what was distressing was that Chao Qingyu and Yang had devoured too much power and divine items. Not only had their injuries mostly healed, but their divine power had also been replenished. Their divine bodies were also bloated like 2 bloated balls. Fortunately, it was all over. If they had continued to devour for half a day, they would probably have exploded. Moreover, they urgently needed to cultivate in seclusion. They needed at least half a year to refine all the power they had devoured and convert it into their own power. Ji Tianxing's situation was slightly better. Although he had devoured 80% of the power after Kai Fei's disintegration. But he had used the devouring theurgy to store the infinite divine power and metal stones in the heaven-mending pearl. In this way, his body size did not change much, and it did not affect him much. The only visible change was that his injuries had mostly healed, and his power had returned to its peak. Once Kai Fei collapses, we will be full. Ji Tianxing looked at Yang and Chao Qingyu. Seeing that they were so full that they could not even speak, he could not help but want to laugh. Forget it. Looking at how greedy you are, you probably won't be able to digest it in a few months. Come with me. With that, he brought Yang and Chao Qingyu back to the heaven-destroying sword formation. Previously, Kai Fei had blasted a huge hole in the sword formation, but it had already repaired itself. Even if Ji Tianxing did not care, the sword formation would automatically operate and cover a radius of 1,000 miles. Ji Tianxing summoned the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda and made it float in the air. Then, he led Chao Qingyu and Yang into the distorted spacetime of the divine pagoda. Shua. The 3 of them flew through the colorful distorted spacetime toward the blood flame sacred tree in the middle. Yang had been in seclusion here for more than 10 years to recuperate, so he was no stranger to the distorted spacetime. However, this was the first time Chao Qingyu had entered a distorted spacetime after following Ji Tianxing. He looked around curiously. When he sensed the changes in spacetime, he was surprised and shocked. At the same time, he also guessed that this was the place where Ji Tianxing and his family usually cultivated in seclusion. In other words, this was Ji Tianxing's most confidential cave residence and lair. Only his closest and most trusted people had the right to come here. Thinking of this, Chao Qingyu felt a little excited. It seems that after so many dangers and tribulations, young Master Tianxing already trusts me. That's great. From this moment on, the couple and Ji Tianxing had let down their guard and truly gained his trust. To him, this was even more exciting than obtaining a king-level theurgy. Soon, the 3 of them flew to the bottom of the blood flame sacred tree. Ji Tianxing looked at the sacred tree and couldn't help but smile. As I expected, Kai Fei's blood qi and soul essence were all devoured by the blood flame sacred tree after his death. The nourishment the sacred tree received this time is several times more than when the domain mistress died. I guess the sacred tree can grow a few 100 feet taller after digesting the blood qi and soul essence. These thoughts flashed through his mind. He turned to Yang and Chao Qingyu and said, "Find a place to cultivate in seclusion under the sacred tree. Don't disturb the others. When I'm done, I'll wake you up." Yang nodded. He found a place to sit down and began to cultivate. Chao Qingyu was unfamiliar with this place. He circled the sacred tree and looked at Ji Ku, Yun Yarrow, and the white dragon. When he saw the black dragon and Chen Yu, he was startled. His eyes were filled with shock. Oh my God! Is that a divine dragon? A black dragon? And that fox? Isn't that a heavenly fox? Why is it here on the boundless heaven continent? Young Master Tianxing has a divine dragon and a heavenly fox as his pets and has never shown them to others. How low-key! Chao Qingyu's heart was pounding with excitement. He was even more in awe of Ji Tianxing's identity and background. Suddenly, he heard Ji Tianxing's voice behind him. "Qingyu, you've been stuck at the third level of the Divine King realm for a few thousand years, right?" Chao Qingyu was startled. He quickly turned to Ji Tianxing and nodded. "Yes, young master. It's been 3,675 years. Ji Tianxing nodded slightly. He took out 9 purple god fruits and placed them in front of Chao Qingyu. "You've already accumulated enough strength and foundation. But you still lack an opportunity. You need a huge amount of divine energy to help you break through to the 4th level. This time, you've absorbed Kai Fei's energy. This is the perfect opportunity. But it's still not enough. After you've absorbed Kai Fei's energy, take these 9 god fruits and continue to cultivate. There's a 70 to 80% chance that you'll break through to the middle level of the Divine King realm." Hearing these words, Chao Qingyu was stunned on the spot. He stared at the 9 purple god fruits and said excitedly, "Young master, what are you doing? I don't deserve such a reward. Take back these precious things." Qingyu doesn't dare to accept them. Ji Tianxing smiled and pointed at the bloody flame sacred tree. "These god fruits are precious. It's not an exaggeration to say that they're priceless. But only my family and friends deserve to enjoy them. And I'll make sure that you're full." Chao Qingyu was shocked again. He looked up at the crown of the bloody flame sacred tree and realized that there were at least 1,000 purple god fruits among the dense branches and leaves. However, the 9 god fruits that Ji Tianxing gave him were bigger. They were obviously ripe. On the other hand, many of the god fruits on the sacred tree were smaller and would take many years to ripen. Chao Qingyu hesitated for a moment before he reached out to take the 9 god fruits. He hugged the god fruits and bent down with difficulty. He bowed to Ji Tianxing and said sincerely, "Thank you, young master, for your trust and gift. I'll never forget it. Cultivate well and become a middle-level divine king soon." Ji Tianxing smiled and patted him on the shoulder. Then, he turned and left. After a full 15 minutes, Chao Qingyu finally calmed down. He chose a place to sit down and cultivate in seclusion. Breaking through to the middle level of the Divine King realm was one of his greatest wishes. In the past, he didn't dare to think about it and didn't have the corresponding opportunity. But now, Ji Tianxing had created an excellent opportunity for him. Moreover, the success rate was as high as 70%. This increased his confidence and made his blood boil. He was full of anticipation. He swore in his heart that he must break through to the 4th level of the Divine King realm and become a middle-level Divine King. No matter what, he couldn't let down Ji Tianxing's trust and help. Chapter 3395. The time in the distorted spacetime was 50 times faster than the outside world. Half a year passed in the blink of an eye. Yang and Chao Qingyu had finished their seclusion. They had refined Kai Fei's energy and the metal and stone. Although their strength had obviously increased by a large margin, and their battle prowess had also increased by 2 times. However, their realms hadn't broken through yet. Seeing that Ji Tianxing was still in seclusion, Yang continued to cultivate to strengthen his foundation of the divine path. Chao Qingyu, on the other hand, was in high spirits. The situation was just as Ji Tianxing had said. After he had refined Kai Fei's energy, his realm had reached the limit of the 3rd heaven of the King God realm. He had reached the critical point. If he didn't have the opportunity to replenish his energy, he would be stuck at the critical point for a long time. But now, he took out the 9 divine fruits that Ji Tianxing had given him and ate them one by one. Although the divine fruits tasted sour, they melted in his stomach and released a great amount of divine energy. Incomparably pure blood qi and divine soul energy surged in his body, helping him break through the shackles of the middle God King realm. He could clearly feel that the barrier between the 3rd and 4th heaven of the King God realm was loosening. Breaking through to the middle God King realm was just around the corner. On the other side, Ji Tianxing was still sitting cross-legged under the blood flame sacred tree. He closed his eyes and cultivated. 5-colored divine flames surrounded his body. In the past half a year, he had refined Kai Fei's energy. His strength had reached the limit of the 1st heaven of the King God realm. Unfortunately, he still needed a huge amount of divine energy to break through to the second heaven of the king god realm. Therefore, he took out Kai Fei's godhead fragment. Kai Fei's body was huge. His godhead was also extraordinarily huge. It was as big as a water tank. Although his godhead had been broken into 18 pieces. However, each piece of the godhead was as big as a wash basin. This is definitely the largest piece of godhood I've ever refined in my life. Ji Tianxing weighed the wash basin-sized godhead fragment in his hand, and a playful smile appeared on his face. Soon, he went into seclusion to refine Kai Fei's godhead. Not only was he going to refine the boundless energy within the godhead, but he was also going to refine the divine Tao laws within it. Time passed quickly. Unknowingly, another year had passed. Ji Tianxing had refined 12 of Kai Fei's 18 godhead fragments. At this moment, he finally broke through the bottleneck of the first level of the Divine King Realm and successfully reached the second level of the Divine King Realm. After raising his cultivation level, Ji Tianxing's body lit up with a divine light that soared into the sky, emitting a world-shaking divine power fluctuation. His divine body continued to strengthen, becoming several times stronger than before. His strength had also increased by leaps and bounds, increasing by more than 8 times. However, he didn't end his seclusion. He continued to focus on his cultivation and continued to refine the remaining godhead fragments. Not only did he devour the energy in the quintessence fragments to strengthen his foundation in the second heaven of the Divine King Realm, but he also increased his strength. He even refined divine Tao laws after divine Tao laws to further strengthen his strength. He estimated that he would need another half a year to refine all 6 godhead fragments and end his seclusion. 4 months ago, Chao Qingyu had already broken through the shackles of the third heaven of the Divine King Realm and successfully reached the fourth heaven of the Divine King Realm, becoming a medium Divine King. At the same time, Ji Tianxing and the others had been cultivating in seclusion in the distorted spacetime for 1.5 years. However, only 11 days had passed in the outside world. 8 days ago was the closing date of the Golden Dragon Abyss. According to the usual practice, the divine flame light shield that sealed the entrance of the abyss would all be repaired. Therefore, the various forces that had entered the abyss to search for treasures, including thousands of Sir God experts, had already left the abyss. After flying out of the abyss, the Sir God experts dispersed and returned to their camps. However, the dozens of forces wouldn't leave immediately. The injured Sir God experts urgently needed treatment, and the forces that had disputes in the abyss would settle it on the surface. Within 3 days, more than 20 forces left one after another. The remaining 40 forces also prepared to leave after the abyss closed. However, on the morning of the 4th day, the Sir God experts discovered something strange. The entrance of the abyss, which was supposed to be closed, didn't move at all. The light shield formed by the 7-colored divine flame still sealed the entrance of the abyss. However, the many cracks and holes on the light shield still existed and hadn't healed. This abnormal reaction shocked and puzzled the 40 forces. They all guessed what was going on. Some people thought that they had calculated the time wrongly and that the entrance of the abyss would only close after a few more days. Some people regretted it so much that they said they had found a mine, but unfortunately, they didn't have time to mine it and could only leave before the abyss closed. If they had known that the entrance of the abyss would close later, they would have taken the risk to mine the mine. Some people even boldly guessed that the energy in the abyss had changed and the entrance wouldn't close in the future. All in all, the dozens of forces had different opinions and no one knew the real answer. However, they were even more unwilling to leave. Many Sir God experts were eager to return to the abyss to continue their exploration. However, those Sir God experts were also afraid that the entrance would close soon after they entered the abyss. If that happened, they would definitely die. Everyone was hesitating, weighing the pros and cons, but no one dared to take the lead to return to the abyss. Until the night of the 11th day. A group of uninvited guests suddenly arrived at the entrance of the abyss and broke the deadlock. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. A mass of 5-colored divine light that blotted out the sky sped over from the night sky. When this mass of divine light stopped at the entrance of the abyss, the dozens of forces saw it clearly. Those were over 100 Sir God experts. Their attire was different and they seemed to come from different empires. However, their strength was all 7th level Sir God and above. They were all high-ranking Sir Gods. In addition, the leaders of this Sir God team were 3 experts with super powerful auras. The leader was 100 feet tall and was burly like a tower. He had a head of golden hair and wore dark yellow ancient bronze armor. There were 6 5-colored wings on his back. He had a blood-colored divine eye on his forehead and 8 ancient bronze divine spears hung on his waist. His entire body emitted a peerless divine might that could suppress heaven and earth. Standing behind him were also 2 experts with unfathomable auras. One was a handsome and valiant youth wearing a white robe. The other was wearing silver divine armor and had a rather valiant appearance. When had the Sir Gods of the dozens of forces seen such a grand lineup before? Although they did not know what realm the strength of those 3 experts had reached. However, they were clear in their hearts that to be able to command close to 100 high-ranking Sir Gods, they were definitely top-notch experts. They were very likely divine kings. As expected. If Ji Tianxing was here, he would be able to recognize those 2 handsome and valiant youths. They were precisely the Golden Dragon Region Lord and Cloud Region Lord, Jing Feihong. The 2 region lords brought close to 100 high-ranking Sir Gods to the entrance of the Golden Dragon Abyss. Naturally, it was to seek revenge on Ji Tianxing. However, the 2 of them were not the leaders of the team. That 100 feet tall Sir God expert with 6 wings and blood-colored eyes was the leader, because his identity was the Azura God Emperor's lackey, the most loyal spy, Divine Envoy Haotian. Book Guest House Reading Website. Chapter 3396. The Azura God Emperor was high and mighty, overlooking and controlling the entire boundless heaven continent. He had not appeared since 1,000 years ago, when he was crowned emperor and took control of the boundless heaven continent. The various affairs of the close to 100 regions on the continent were handled by the various region lords. However, the Azura God Emperor had 49 heavenly god envoys who patrolled the continent on his behalf. While supervising the close to 100 region lords, they also had to maintain the peace and stability of the boundless heaven continent. Of course, the 49 heavenly god envoys would not appear at the same time. They were divided into 7 teams and took turns every few decades. Every time, 7 god envoys would be dispatched to patrol the continent. God King Stellar Aspect was one of the 49 heavenly god envoys. 8 years ago, his team left the God Emperor's palace, and the 7 god envoys began patrolling the boundless heaven continent and handling various affairs. In these 8 years, he had patrolled 5 regions. 3 of the regions were as peaceful as ever. Only 2 regions had some thorny problems that required his supervision, control, and handling. Not long ago, a problem had arisen in Sanchuan region. The Sanchuan region lord reported the situation to the Azura God Emperor through the God Prayer altar and asked for help. However, the Azura God Emperor did not receive the news. The deputy commander of the heavenly god envoys was responsible for guarding the God Emperor's palace's all-life altar and receiving requests and messages from the various region lords. The deputy commander would not disturb the Azura God Emperor at all for such unimportant matters. He could have just sent any heavenly god envoy to handle it. After receiving the deputy commander's message, God King Stellar Aspect rushed to Sanchuan region to handle the affairs. The matter was not too serious, but it was very complicated and cumbersome, thus delaying him for 2 months. Soon, the pile of troublesome matters had finally been settled. God King Stellar Aspect finally heaved a sigh of relief and prepared to leave Sanchuan region for the next region. However, at this moment, the Golden Dragon Region Lord and Jing Feihong managed to contact him and sent him a message for help. When he learned that 4 divine kings had invaded the Cloud Realm and the Golden Dragon domain and started a massacre, killing innocent people, he was instantly enraged. Those 4 god kings were actually so savage, openly breaking the rules and violating the rules set by the God Emperor. They must be severely punished. Moreover, he was preparing to travel and relax for a period of time, but he encountered such a troublesome matter, so he was naturally resentful. Filled with anger, God King Stellar Aspect traveled day and night to the Golden Dragon region. Jing Feihong and the Golden Dragon Realm's ruler treated him with great hospitality and gave him a detailed explanation of the situation. Thus, God King Stellar Aspect ordered the two of them to transfer nearly 100 higher deity lords from the Cloud Yang and Golden Dragon regions. Then, he led the two area masters and hundreds of Sir Gods to the Golden Dragon Abyss. Why haven't these people left? Stellar Aspect surveyed his surroundings and could not help but frown when he saw thousands of divine lords around him. As the Oracle of Haotian, he was used to being mysterious and did not like to show his face in front of ordinary people. The Golden Dragon Realm Lord hurriedly explained, "Please forgive me, Divine Envoy. I heard from my subordinates that something strange has occurred in the Abyss. According to past practice, the Divine Fire Seal at the Abyss entrance should have been sealed a few days ago. However, for some unknown reason, the gap in the seal has yet to close. Those Sir Gods are still hoping for a fluke and are unwilling to leave." Divine King Stellar Aspect frowned and asked, "It has always been normal in the past. Only this time, something strange has happened. Then, does this anomaly have something to do with those 4 deity kings?" The Golden Dragon Realm Lord thought for a moment and said with an uncertain tone, "Perhaps." Divine King Stellar Aspect maintained his cold expression as he continued asking, "It has been so long since you fought with them. Are you sure they have not fled and are still in the Abyss?" The Golden Dragon Realm Lord hurriedly nodded and answered with a very certain tone, "Those 4 deity kings were extremely arrogant and did not take me seriously at all. Furthermore, they are certain that there are many treasures and resources in the Abyss. How could they bear to flee? I even sent my subordinates to stand guard here and keep an eye on the Abyss entrance to ensure that they have not come out." Jing Feihong thought for a moment and asked with a frown, "Brother Long, is there only one entrance to the Abyss? Are you sure there are no other exits?" The Golden Dragon Realm Lord nodded with certainty. "Yes, very sure." Divine King Stellar Aspect raised his palm and said in a deep voice, "In that case, there's no time to lose. Let's enter the Abyss immediately and capture those 4 deity kings. In addition, get those fellows who have nothing better to do to scram. Don't be an eyesore here." Upon hearing Divine King Stellar Aspect's order, the Golden Dragon Realm Lord knew that he was getting impatient. However, the Golden Dragon Realm Lord could only bite the bullet and remind him, "Lord Divine Envoy, I'm afraid it's not appropriate for us to enter the Abyss just like that. Firstly, the Abyss is filled with 7-colored divine flames. That is the Earth Core divine fire at the godly monarch level. The 100 Sir Gods that we have deployed will definitely suffer heavy losses once they enter the Abyss. Their movements will also be very slow. In addition, you might not know this, but the Abyss underground is extremely vast. It stretches for millions of kilometers. We are lacking in manpower. To find those 4 deity kings in such a vast sea of lava is as difficult as ascending to the heavens." Not only did Divine King Stellar Aspect frown, but his eyes also narrowed as a cold glint flashed in them. He was somewhat infuriated as he cursed inwardly, "Darn bastard, does this king need you to remind me? Since you know everything and have long thought of a countermeasure and plan, why did you invite this king here?" However, he could only criticize inwardly. He did not flare up on the surface as he asked in a deep voice, "Then, do you mean that we will not enter the Abyss and will just wait here for the 4 deity kings to come out?" "Ah." The Golden Dragon Realm Lord hesitated for a moment before nodding with a bitter smile. "Yes, that's the only way for now." Divine King Stellar Aspect's frown deepened as he asked in a somewhat displeased tone, "Just wait here? If they stay in the Abyss for 3 to 5 years without coming out, do we have to wait here for a few years as well? This king represents His Holiness the God Emperor and shoulders the sacred responsibility of patrolling the boundless heaven continent. How can this king waste time here?" Divine King Stellar Aspect put on the airs of a divine envoy with great authority. Jing Feihong and the Golden Dragon Realm Lord immediately felt a headache as their hearts clenched. When they decided to seek help from the divine envoy, they had expected such a situation to occur. They did not expect such a situation to occur the moment Divine King Stellar Aspect arrived at the Abyss entrance. Helpless, the duo could only bite the bullet and persuade him while apologizing to him. "Lord Divine Envoy, please calm your anger. You hold a high position and shoulder the heavy responsibility of protecting the entire continent. How can we dare to waste your time? Lord Divine Envoy, please calm your anger. This subordinate was inconsiderate. This subordinate deserves death. However, Lord Divine Envoy, please calm down. Those 4 deity kings are extremely insolent. It's impossible for them to wait that long. At most, half a month. At least, 3 to 5 days. They will definitely appear. All right. Divine King Stellar Aspect nodded as he said with a gloomy expression, then, we'll set half a month as the deadline. If they still do not appear by then, we'll proceed according to this king's plan. Chapter 3397. Unknowingly, another 4 days passed. Godly King Stellar Aspect, Jing Feihong, and the Golden Dragon Domain Lord waited patiently at the entrance to the abyss. Nearly 100 high divine lords had followed their instructions and set up ambushes around the entrance. Even though Ji Tianxing and Chao Qingyu had yet to appear, they had all prepared themselves mentally. However, they were all mentally prepared to not retreat for less than half a month. In addition, the 40-plus factions around the abyss had all retreated further away. Although the Golden Dragon Domain Lord had obeyed Godly King Stellar Aspect's orders and chased them away, the leaders of many factions had recognized the Golden Dragon Domain Lord. They had all guessed that Jing Feihong was definitely another godly king. As for the leader, Godly King Stellar Aspect, his aura was even more powerful and dignified. His status was definitely higher than the Golden Dragon Domain Lords. In addition, the 3 Godly King experts had brought nearly 100 high divine lords to surround the entrance to the abyss. Even a fool could tell that something big had happened. Something earth-shattering was definitely going to happen. Who would be willing to miss this once-in-a-lifetime show? Thus, the thousands of godly lords of the 40-plus factions were unwilling to leave the Golden Dragon Abyss. In order not to be an eyesore to the 3 godly kings, they would rather retreat 10,000 kilometers away and silently observe the situation at the entrance to the abyss. 4 days passed in the outside world. Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu, Yank, and the others had already been in seclusion for half a year in the distorted spacetime. In this half a year, Chao Qingyu had focused on cultivation and did his best to consolidate his foundation at the 4th level of the Godly King realm. Yank had also done his best to increase his strength and was gradually approaching the peak of the 4th level of the Godly King realm. His combat strength had also increased. As for Ji Tianxing, he had already completely refined the remaining 6 divine spark fragments. This had allowed his strength at the 2nd level of the Godly King realm to be even more stable, and his combat strength had increased significantly. Furthermore, the number of divine Dao laws he had mastered had increased to 400. When the time was up, Ji Tianxing ended his cultivation. However, he did not leave, nor did he awaken Yank and Chao Qingyu. He frowned as he pondered, I've already been in seclusion for 2 years. Only half a month in the outside world. Although I've gained a lot from this trip, breaking through to the 2nd level of the Godly King realm and my combat strength, I haven't been able to create the sword. However, I haven't had the time to forge the Heavenpiercer sword. Why don't I take this opportunity to help it advance to the king level? Ever since Ji Tianxing came into contact with God King experts, every time he fought with a God King expert, he would be at a disadvantage because of his divine weapon. Everyone else had a king-grade divine artifact, but his heaven-burying sword was still at the monarch grade. Even if his battle prowess was the same as others, his hands and feet would be tied, and he would not be able to unleash his full strength. God King Realm Divine Sword of Divine Tao. King Divine Swords Divine God, Divine to Heaven, to upgrade to Sword to Divine Sword to the Sword of Sword. God King God. Divine to God of Divine to God King, to Heaven Divine to Him of Divine to be. He used his mind to contact buried Heaven, who had been in a deep slumber for a long time, and told him that he wanted to reforge the divine sword. Burial of Heaven had been waiting for this day for a long time. Once it confirmed that it had enough materials, it agreed without hesitation. Next, Ji Tianxing began to prepare things related to the reforging of the divine sword. Divine cauldrons or divine cauldrons were needed. The divine cauldrons in Kenshin's tomb and the divine weapon pavilion could be put to good use. It had been almost 100 years since he last used the divine cauldron. This time, Ji Tianxing took out the divine cauldron and placed it in the distorted spacetime. He had plenty of godly stones and resources in his interspatial ring, so he had plenty of them. Moreover, there was a sea of lava outside the Jyotian 10 Absolutes Tower. He could extract endless 7-colored divine flames from it. Those were king-level divine flames, the purest divine flames in the Earth's core. They were most suitable for refining king-level divine weapons. Finally, Ji Tianxing took out a few more materials from his spatial ring. A bottle of galaxy gold sand, a portion of Xuanji source qi, and a 30,000-year-old divine dragon spine. He got these 3 materials from Chao Qingyu's cave abode. Fortunately, Chao Qingyu was cultivating in seclusion not far away and did not notice. Otherwise, Chao Qingyu would feel a little awkward if she saw him using these 3 materials to refine a weapon. In addition, Ji Tianxing took out 4 purple flame divine stones and a piece of 7 fire divine metal. The 7 fire divine metal had been refined by Yank and could be used to refine weapons. However, the purple flame divine stone was different. Ji Tianxing still needed to refine it into purple flame silver thread before it could be used. After all, the normal purple flame divine stone was only a supreme monarch-level material. With everything ready, Ji Tianxing began to refine weapons. He took out 1 billion divine stones and placed them in the divine cauldron to support the divine flames. Then, he cast a spell to guide the 7-colored divine flames in the sea of lava into the divine cauldron. The 7-colored divine flames burned in the divine cauldron, and many arrays were activated, causing the divine flames to burn more vigorously and the temperature to rise rapidly. Next, Ji Tianxing placed the 4 purple flame divine stones into the cauldron and began to refine the purple flame silver thread. This task was not complicated, but it required a lot of skill and experience. Fortunately, Ji Tianxing was very experienced. He had done this many times in the past, so he was very familiar with this task now. Half a month later, the 4 purple flame divine stones disappeared and turned into thousands of purple flame silver thread. Every single silver strand was 10 zhong long. Light swirled around them, and they burned with intense purple flames. They looked extremely gorgeous. All 5 materials were ready. Ji Tianxing placed the Burial of Heaven sword into the divine cauldron and began to refine the Burial of Heaven sword into a ball of golden liquid. Half a month later, he began to add materials into the divine cauldron. Each material had to be added at a different time, and their effects were also different. This required an experienced divine blacksmith to accurately fuse the materials with the sword embryo through the divine flames and the divine cauldron's fine control. All in all, this task took a very long time and was very complicated. God King level divine weapons were not something that just any God King could refine. Time passed quickly. 2 months, 3 months, 5 months, another half a year passed in the blink of an eye. Yank and Chao Qingyu came out of seclusion and stopped cultivating. The 2 of them were still wondering why Ji Tianxing had not woken them up after such a long time. When the 2 of them saw a divine cauldron the size of a palace under the blood flame sacred tree, they understood what was going on. What is young master doing? Is he refining a divine pill? Maybe he's refining a divine weapon? I think I heard young master say that he's planning to refine a divine sword. Let's go and take a look. Yank raised his eyebrows and said instigated. Yes. Chao Qingyu nodded in agreement without hesitation. He said expectantly, my skill in refining is very ordinary. I'll definitely benefit a lot from watching young master refine a divine weapon. You're very sneaky, kid. Yank looked at him from the corner of his eyes and said unhappily, you must have benefited a lot from following master for so long, right? Of course, not. Chao Qingyu naturally did not want to admit it. He just felt a little guilty and quickly turned his face away. Yanku stared at him for a while and suddenly realized something. He exclaimed in surprise. Hey! How did you break through to Tier 4? Chapter 3398. Yank's eyes widened as he revealed an expression of disbelief. Chao Qingyu was rather proud and could not help but puff out his chest. He smiled and said, how is it? I'm also a middle divine king now, the same realm as you. In the future, you don't have the right to show off in front of me. You. Yank frowned and said with jealousy, I already said that young master gave you a lot of benefits and you still don't want to admit it. So what if I did? Chao Qingyu simply admitted it and said proudly, "You're jealous, right?" "You, damn it." Yank's face darkened and said angrily, "So what if we're at the same realm? You just broke through to the 4th realm and I'm already at the peak of the 4th realm. If you're not convinced, let's fight now, how about it?" TSK. What a waste of time. I still want to watch young master refine weapons. Chao Qingyu rolled his eyes and flew towards the 9 heavens cauldron. In the past, he would not have such an expression. After following Ji Tianxing for a long time, he rolled his eyes very smoothly. Yang Ku suppressed his anger and hurriedly followed him. In the blink of an eye, the two of them arrived near the 9 heavens cauldron. At this time, the two of them saw that Ji Tianxing was sitting cross-legged in the distorted space and was concentrating on casting the divine skill. He was absorbing the power of the blood flame sacred tree to maintain his divine power at the peak while casting the divine skill to control the 9 heavens cauldron. Both of his hands were holding the divine skill and shooting out rays of 5-colored divine light to adjust the flame in the 9 heavens cauldron and control the sword embryo and a few other materials. Looking at his skill, Yank and Chao Qingyu could not take their eyes off him and revealed a look of curiosity and surprise. The two of them temporarily forgot about their anger and started to discuss in a low voice. "What kind of skill is young master using? Why can't I understand it?" He. "You're a big guy and your brain is not enough. How can you understand it?" Me. "Don't look down on me, as if you can understand it." Although I don't understand it very well, I'm observing and learning. I despise you. Immune to contempt. The two of them bickered, but their eyes were fixed on the divine cauldron and Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing's refining skills, casting techniques, and timing were all perfect. The subtle changes in the divine cauldron also indicated that the divine sword would continue to strengthen, and the sword embryo would gradually take shape. Yank and Chao Qingyu saw this and learned many skills from it. Soon, another half a year had passed. Ji Tianxing had been refining the sword of burial of heaven for an entire year. However, it seemed that his refining work was not even halfway done yet. After fusing with the 5 materials, the sword embryo underwent a new transformation, and its shape was basically confirmed. However, Ji Tianxing still had to make some minor adjustments to sort out the internal structure of the divine sword, down to every grain of metal and every vein. This took another 3 months. Next was the most important part of refining the divine sword. Inscribing law divine marks and divine formation divine marks. The biggest difference between king-grade divine artifacts and monarch-grade divine artifacts was that king-grade divine craftsmen could inscribe divine Dao laws onto weapons, armors, and other items. Meanwhile, divine lord-level experts could only grasp and use divine Dao laws, but could not apply them onto equipment. In addition, the formation patterns inscribed on king-grade divine artifacts were often called restrictions. The more laws and restrictions a divine artifact contained, the stronger its power. Of course, the level of the laws and restrictions also had to be high enough. An ordinary king-grade divine artifact could condense 100 types of laws and thousands of restrictions, and it was a qualified low-grade king-grade divine artifact. Meanwhile, a middle-grade king-grade divine artifact needed at least 300 types of laws and 3,000 restrictions. As for a high-grade king-grade divine artifact, it needed 900 types of laws and 9,000 restrictions. As for a supreme-grade king-grade divine artifact, that was a divine item that only existed in legends. It was said that it appeared in the ancient era, but it had not been heard of in the past 10,000 years. A supreme-grade king-grade divine artifact needed at least 1,800 types of laws and 18,000 restrictions. Even Kenshin in his previous life did not grasp that many divine Dao laws. The previous Sword of Burial of Heaven, at its peak, was merely a high-grade king-grade divine artifact. Even so, it had once been ranked in the top 10 of the Divine World's divine artifact rankings. Ji Tianxing was still focused on casting spells. He was inscribing divine runes of laws and divine runes of array Dao on the brand new Heavenpiercer sword. This work was very meticulous, and there was no room for error. Therefore, his inscribing speed was not fast, and his mind was also fully focused. Chao Qingyu and Yank kept their mouths shut and watched attentively, afraid that they would miss any details. 1 month, 3 months, 5 months, half a year, time passed quickly, but the three of them did not notice. After a full 2 years, Ji Tianxing had inscribed 300 types of laws and 3,000 restrictions on the Sword of Burial of Heaven. Only now did he stop inscribing divine patterns and carry out the final finishing work. Chao Qingyu and Yank were already stunned and could not help but exclaim, "Oh my God! Young Master actually inscribed 300 divine runes of laws and 3,000 types of formation restrictions on the divine sword. Mid-grade king-grade divine artifact. He actually made a mid-grade king-grade divine artifact in one go? Isn't this too exaggerated? Could he be a medium divine blacksmith?" A divine king who could make a king-grade divine artifact was no longer a blacksmith, but a divine blacksmith. However, divine blacksmiths were also divided into lower, middle, and upper levels. Among them, lesser divine blacksmiths were more common. Divine kings like Chao Qingyu and Yank could become lesser divine blacksmiths after 1,000 years of refining. However, medium divine blacksmiths were rarer, and there were only 1 or 2 in 10 divine kings. As for higher divine blacksmiths, they were even more of a legendary existence, and there were only a few of them in the entire continent. Chao Qingyu and Yank knew this, so how could they not be shocked? "We're rich. We can watch a medium divine blacksmith forge up close. This is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Look at you, don't be so excited. As long as we follow young master, we just need to serve him well and do our duty. There will be many opportunities to watch in the future." 3 days later, Ji Tianxing's forging was completely finished. The 9 heavens cauldron stopped spinning, and the endless divine flames were finally extinguished. Swoosh! After the cauldron's lid was opened, a 4-foot-long, pitch-black divine sword flew out of the cauldron. This was the new Burial of Heaven sword that had completed its upgrade and transformation. It was longer and wider than an ordinary divine sword, straight and upright, but also mysterious and gloomy, containing a bone-chilling aura of death. Originally, the Burial of Heaven sword that Kenshin wielded back then was a mighty sword of light, with divine light and no gloomy aura of death. But now, the Burial of Heaven sword had become like this. Ji Tianxing held the Burial of Heaven sword with both hands, frowning as he observed it for a moment. He couldn't help but mutter, "I thought it was caused by the origin stones, and that it would return to its original state after you restored the king-grade divine artifact. I didn't expect that after fusing so many king-grade materials, it would still be as black as ink, gloomy and cold. Could it be related to our experience?" The Burial of Heaven's deep voice sounded in his mind, "Perhaps. Otherwise, why would it carry the aura of death? You can only slowly solve this problem in the future." Chapter 3399. Alright, you should get used to the new sword body first. Ji Tianxing instructed the Burial of Heaven and kept the Burial of Heaven sword. When he kept the 9th heaven cauldron back into the divine weapon chamber, he saw Yank and Chao Qingyu discussing in the distorted spacetime not far away. "I haven't informed you, why have you come out of seclusion?" Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and asked the both of them. Chao Qingyu and Yank stopped their discussion and hurriedly flew over to greet him. "Greetings, young master." "Greetings, Lord." After greeting him, Chao Qingyu explained, "Young master, before we went into seclusion, you said that you would wake us up 2 years later. We kept thinking about it and came out of seclusion when the time was up. In the end, when we came, you were still refining the divine sword, so we didn't dare to disturb you and just waited by the side." Yank added on, "My lord's armament refining skills and techniques are something we have never heard of before, so we just observed from the side. I hope my lord doesn't blame us." Ji Tianxing sized them up and laughed lightly, "Not bad, the both of you are quite ambitious. During this seclusion, Qingyu has broken through to the 4th stage realm and Yank's ability has also increased by quite a bit. Very good. Compared to Chao Qingyu and Yank, his improvement was the greatest. Not only did he break through to the next realm, he had mastered 400 God Dao laws and even reforged the Burial of Heaven sword. In total, his battle power had increased by 10 times. The results of this seclusion were satisfactory and Ji Tianxing was very satisfied. "Alright, we have been delayed here for 4 years and 1 month has passed outside. It's time for us to leave." Saying that, He led Chao Qingyu and Yank away from the blood flame sacred tree and flew towards the outside. Yank hurriedly followed up and asked him, "My lord, did you teach Chao Qingyu some remarkable secret skill? Or did he give him some kind of treasure? Otherwise, based on his talent and aptitude, how could he possibly become a middle-level divine king? You see, I've also reached the peak of the 4th level, why don't you also?" Before Yank could finish, Ji Tianxing waved his hand and interrupted him. He said with a faint smile, "Did you forget what I said before? As long as you perform well and are loyal to your duty." Yank didn't need to finish his sentence to know what he meant. He quickly nodded and said, "Understood." Understood. To put it bluntly, he had only followed Ji Tianxing for a short period of time, and his contributions were not enough. He was not qualified to be taught by Ji Tianxing. The three of them didn't say anything more. They left the distorted spacetime together and flew out of the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Tower. Shua. With a flash of white light, the three of them appeared outside the Divine Tower, standing in the air above the sea of lava. Looking around, the lava sea within a radius of 1,000 miles was still calm. The heaven-destroying sword formation that blotted out the sky was still operating on its own. Starlight flickered. Ji Tianxing checked and found that the heaven-destroying sword formation was not damaged at all, nor had it been attacked. "We have been cultivating in seclusion for so long, and half a month has passed in the outside world, but no one has come here. The sword formation is also not damaged. It seems that the forces that entered the abyss to explore have all left." Chao Qingyu nodded in agreement. He asked, "Master, should we continue to explore and search for treasures, or should we leave the abyss?" Yank frowned and reminded him, "We already know that the mineral veins and resources that appeared on the reef islands were bait deliberately released by Kai Fei. In the past 2 months, a few thousand Sir Gods from dozens of forces swept through the lava sea. Now that Kai Fei is dead, there shouldn't be many resources and treasures left in the lava sea, right?" Ji Tianxing nodded slightly and said, "Even if there are some resources and treasures left, they are the leftovers of others, and we don't need them. Let's leave the abyss first and continue south. I still have many things to do." Indeed. He had returned to the Divine King realm, and the Sword of Burial of Heaven had been restored to the king level. He might not be able to do whatever he wanted in the divine world, but he could at least cross the 4 continents and the various seas easily. He wanted to return to the chaotic land and look for his old subordinates. Moreover, he wanted to go to the Dragon Realm as soon as possible to find Wuhan. Swoosh. Swoosh swoosh. Divine light flashed, Ji Tianxing and the other 2 streaked across the sky like lightning, heading straight for the exit of the abyss. Even though the sky above the lava sea was filled with the 7-colored divine flames. After Kai Fei died, the 7-colored divine flames were not controlled by anyone, and they became especially turbulent and violent. The 7-colored divine flames that filled the abyss were several times more than normal. Not only were they more violent, but their density was also more terrifying. Even Ji Tianxing and the other 2's flying speed was affected, and they slowed down a little. If an ordinary Sir God came, it would be almost impossible for them to move, and they would be burned to ashes in a short while. Fortunately, the journey was peaceful, and there were no incidents. 2 days later, Ji Tianxing and the other 2 returned to the exit, and flew along the abyss to the surface. In the process of flying, they found that the 7-colored divine flames in the abyss that was about 10,000 miles deep had increased by several times. Under such circumstances, Sir Gods could not enter at all. The 3 were getting closer and closer to the surface, and they were about to leave the abyss. Chao Qingyu could not help but sigh. This Golden Dragon abyss has been prosperous for thousands of years, and it has attracted countless Sir Gods to explore. It was unknown how many people had been buried here, and how many people had obtained opportunities here. But from now on, this abyss can be considered to have declined. Not only will no Sir Gods be able to enter, but the treasures and resources in the abyss will also wither. Ji Tianxing nodded and said, "This was originally a trap set by Kai Fei. Every 100 years, he will devour a batch of Sir Gods, so it's good that it's destroyed. Compared to the many Sir Gods who died tragically here, the resources in the abyss are actually nothing." Chao Qingyu smiled and said emotionally, "But this is the nature of the God race. They selectively ignore the cannon fodder and the dead, and only focus on the lucky ones who have made a fortune and obtained opportunities. This is because they also desire to be the lucky ones, to stand out from the many Sir gods and not be mediocre. Yank felt the same, and said with a complicated tone, only one genius can be born out of 100 mediocre people. But everyone only sees the halo of a genius, and chooses to ignore the sacrifice of 99 mediocre people. While the three were talking, they had already flown out of the abyss. Swoosh, swoosh, swoosh. In a flash of divine light, they returned to the surface. After passing through the gap in the divine flame's light shield, they completely left the abyss and flew back into the blue sky. Before they could see their surroundings clearly, they heard two cold voices gnashing their teeth. Damn bastards, you're finally out. Ha ha ha. This king's long wait was not in vain. You're finally here. Hearing these two familiar voices, Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu, and Yank looked up. They saw the white-robed Golden Dragon Region Master and silver-armored Jing Feihong staring at them from above, their faces filled with hatred and cold smiles. The three of them looked around and saw that nearly 100 high divine lords had already surrounded them. Chapter 3400. The Golden Dragon Region Lord and Jing Feihong were filled with hatred. They looked like they were about to spit fire from their eyes as they gritted their teeth. The hundreds of upper-level deity lords in different attire around them were also cold and murderous, silent and solemn. Ji Tianxing probed further with his deific consciousness and discovered that there were 5 emperor-level divine formations hidden around them. There were formations for concealment, suppression, sealing, and attack. It was a complete set. Faced with such a situation, Ji Tianxing and the other two were only slightly surprised. There was no hint of panic or worry. Yank was the first to speak, mocking with a sneer, "Oh, isn't this the Golden Dragon Region Lord? More than a month ago, you ran away like a stray dog. How dare you come back for revenge today? Have you grown bolder? Or did you hate him so much that you've lost your mind?" Chao Qingyu looked at Jing Feihong with feigned surprise and sneered, "You don't know, Yank. That's the Region Lord, Jing Feihong. You may not know this, but Lord Jing was defeated by young Master as well. He was beaten up badly. I was wondering why the Golden Dragon Region Lord dared to come back and ambush us. It turns out that he found Jing Feihong to help him." Yank pretended to be enlightened and nodded, "I see. No wonder the Golden Dragon Region Lord is so bold and arrogant. However, you're too blind, Region Lord. Why did you ask Jing Feihong for help? He was defeated by our young Master as well. You two stray dogs are no match for our young Master even if you join forces. You'll still be beaten up today." Yang Ku and Chao Qingyu's sarcastic tone made Jing Feihong and the Golden Dragon Realm's ruler so angry that their faces turned ashen, and their chests rose and fell rapidly. "Despicable beasts, don't you dare be so arrogant. Let's see how long you can be smug. Laugh as much as you like. This king guarantees that you won't even have time to cry later." Jing Feihong and the Golden Dragon Region Lord cursed through gritted teeth, their faces filled with malicious grins. At this moment, Ji Tianxing finally spoke. He looked calmly at the two territorial rulers, a cold smile on his lips as he said, "I originally thought that the lesson I gave you last time was enough, and that you wouldn't dare to come back for revenge. I didn't expect the two of you to join forces. However, with just the two of you and more than 100 Sir gods, you want to seek revenge from this king? How naive. If I'm not wrong, you should have found a stronger backer. For example, the other domain lords, or experts above the domain lords. Otherwise, where did you get the confidence to speak to me like this?" It was indeed beyond Ji Tianxing's expectations that the Golden Dragon Realm ruler and Jing Feihong would join forces and set up an ambush here. But since it had already happened, he immediately accepted the reality. Based on this, he deduced that the other party still had powerful reinforcements, but they were hiding them temporarily. As expected. The Golden Dragon Domain Master and Jing Feihong both grinned coldly. "Ha ha ha. Although you little bastard are hateful, you're not stupid. Tianxing, it doesn't matter how smart or cunning you are. It's useless. Your time of death has come. Today, you won't be able to escape even if you have wings. You will die without a doubt." After saying that, the two of them looked at each other, bowed at the same time, and retreated. They shouted in unison, "Welcome, divine envoy Haotien." As their sonorous voices rang out, a God clan man, who was 30 meters tall, had 6 colorful wings, blood-red eyes, and a head full of golden hair, stepped out. Swoosh! As soon as this person appeared, he brought with him an invisible divine power that covered the entrance of the abyss, which was thousands of miles wide. The unparalleled divine power that suppressed the heavens and the earth was like a flood, pressing down on Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu, and Yank. In an instant, the sneers on Chao Qingyu and Yank's faces froze, and their brows furrowed tightly. Their eyes also became serious. Who is this guy? His strength is a medium divine king, and his at the peak of the 5th tier. Only Ji Tianxing's expression did not change. He stared at the 30-meter tall divine king's stellar aspect and shook his head. No, not the peak of the 5th tier, but the initial stage of the 6th tier. 6th tier of the divine king realm. Upon hearing this news, Chao Qingyu and Yank's expressions changed again, and their eyes became even more serious. They were still full of confidence a moment ago, but now, it was as if a basin of cold water had been poured over them, and their backs turned cold. 6th stage God King experts were not commonly seen in the continent. Among the hundreds of territorial lords, only 30% of them could reach this level. Furthermore, these territorial lords were located in the middle of the continent, occupying the most prosperous and affluent regions. For example, the Northern Heaven Domain, the Cloud Domain, and the Golden Dragon Domain were located at the borders of the boundless heaven continent. In comparison, they were more barren, and it was almost impossible to see a 6th-tier Divine King. Divine King Stellar Aspect looked down at Ji Tianxing from above, and his lips curled into a cold smile. "Kid, to be able to maintain your composure after seeing this king, you must be having a hard time holding on, right? Do you know who this king is? Do you know that this king has waited here for a month for the both of you? Ha ha ha, this is your honor. To be able to make this king wait for so long, and to receive this king's judgment and punishment, you should be proud and grateful." Divine King Stellar Aspect changed his gloomy image from before, and became spirited. His voice boomed like a bell, and his aura was incomparably dignified. This was because his identity had already been announced. Not only were the crowd present, but there were also thousands of divine lords waiting to watch the show in the sky above the forest thousands of miles away. No matter what, Divine King Stellar Aspect had to maintain the dignity and dominance of Divine Envoy Haotien. He must not disgrace the dignity of the God Emperor. After all, he was the envoy of the Azura God Emperor on the continent. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and looked at Divine King Stellar Aspect. He said with a teasing smile, "There's no need to introduce yourself. Haven't those two fellows already shouted out? Divine Envoy Haotien. Right, what's Divine Envoy Haotien? Why hasn't this king heard of it before? Could it be a self-given title?" As he said that, he turned his head to ask Chao Qingyu and Yank, "Have the two of you heard of Divine Envoy Haotien?" "No." Chao Qingyu shook his head honestly. After all, he had left the vast heaven continent for 10,000 years and had only returned this year. He still did not understand the changes in the vast heaven continent. Yank frowned. After thinking for a moment, he explained, "I haven't heard of Divine Envoy Haotien, but I know of Chaos Divine Envoy. They are the envoys under the God Emperor, and they patrol the continent on behalf of the God Emperor, handling all sorts of miscellaneous matters." Ji Tianxing understood and nodded. "Oh, so they are the envoys of the Azura God Emperor, patrolling guards." Seeing the trio's reaction, Divine King Stellar Aspect frowned as his eyes shimmered with a cold glint. "Kid, since you know this king's identity, why aren't you kneeling? Are you looking down on the dignity of His Majesty the God Emperor? Do you want to be executed?" The Golden Dragon Region Lord and Jing Feihong stood behind Divine King Stellar Aspect. They were overjoyed when they saw Ji Tianxing and company ridiculing them without a care. The two of them looked at each other and could not help but communicate through voice transmissions, letting out joyful cheers. "Ha ha ha ha, look at their dumb looks. They are simply too stupid. Ha ha ha, they are indeed arrogant enough. They don't even care about Divine Envoy Haotien. They are dead for sure now. Even the heavens can't save them. Chapter 34:01. The more arrogant Ji Tianxing and company were and the worse their attitude toward godly King Stellar Aspect, the more the Golden Dragon Region Lord and Jing Feihong gloated. They invited godly King Stellar Aspect to uphold justice. Relying on godly King Stellar Aspect's strength was secondary. Most importantly, they wanted to borrow godly King Stellar Aspect's status and authority to suppress and punish Ji Tianxing and company. Regardless of where Ji Tianxing and company came from, what background they had, or what schemes they had, it was all useless in front of divine emissary Haotian. Even if they had powerful backers and backgrounds, they could not compare to divine emissary Haotian. This was because divine emissary Haotian was an emissary of the Azura God Emperor. Offending divine emissary Haotian was equivalent to offending the Azura God Emperor. It was not tolerated by the entire boundless heaven continent. When that happened, Ji Tianxing and company would be consigned to eternal damnation. The Golden Dragon Region Lord and Jing Feihong could sit back and watch the show. They could wait to see them suffer the wrath of the Azura God Emperor. At that moment, godly King Stellar Aspect was already enraged. He was berating Ji Tianxing and company. The show was about to begin. How could they not be excited and look forward to it? Facing godly King Stellar Aspect's pressure, Ji Tianxing remained indifferent. He said coldly, "Firstly, you are only the Azura God Emperor's lackey and not the Azura God Emperor himself. Even if I meet the Azura God Emperor, I will not kneel and greet him, much less you. Secondly, you did not ask for the truth and listened to the slanderous words of those two region lords. Don't you think that's too foolish? You don't even know that you are being used by the two of them and are still flaunting your prowess here. What right do you have to be divine emissary Haotian?" Although godly King Stellar Aspect had nothing to do with him. But godly King Stellar Aspect did not have much of a relationship with the Golden Dragon Region Lord and Jing Feihong. Under such circumstances, godly King Stellar Aspect, as the divine emissary who patrolled the continent, should maintain a fair and just attitude. Regardless of the matter, he should let both parties confront each other and determine who was in the wrong before dealing with punishment. This was the attitude of a divine emissary. Haotian would not sully the reputation of the Azura God Emperor. However, godly King Stellar Aspect did not do so. He had been waiting at the entrance of the abyss for a month. He was already burning with anger, and hated Ji Tianxing and the others. Therefore, he was destined not to listen to Ji Tianxing's words. "Ha ha ha. Brat. Kid. How dare you insult me?" Looking down on His Holiness the God Emperor. "Who do you think you are? How dare you teach me how to handle matters? Godly King Stellar Aspect's divine emissaries King SSSS. Stellar King Stellar Aspect Stellar Emperor Stellar Sunday was Stellar King Haotian was. Don't try to confuse right and wrong, invert black and white, and sow discord between this king and the two domain lords. Let me tell you clearly, you're finished. Stellar divine you. Just based on the fact that you looked down on His Majesty the God Emperor and spoke arrogant words to insult this king, you have committed an unforgivable capital crime. Don't even think of quibbling or struggling. Accept your punishment." As he spoke, Stellar Aspect raised his right hand and gradually clenched his fist. He bellowed with an authoritative tone, "These three fanatics have already violated the Divine Emperor's heavenly decree. Their crimes are punishable by death. Everyone, listen up. Kill the criminal immediately. Execute him without mercy." Following God King Stellar Aspect's order, nearly 100 fully armed High Divine Lords brandished their divine weapons in unison, besieging Ji Tianxing's group of three. Everyone gave it their all and used their strongest killing moves. They released divine art shadows that blotted out the sky and rained down on the trio. Swoosh, swoosh. Nearly 10,000 divine light blades blotted out the sky for hundreds of kilometers. They immediately drowned out Ji Tianxing and company. The trio was in an extremely perilous situation, but they remained composed and did not panic. As the divine light blades rained down on them, Yank and Chao Qingyu drew their sabers and swords, using their divine abilities to counterattack. Moreover, the two of them also released a vast amount of divine power, forming a thick divine light shield to protect themselves. Ji Tianxing did not conjure a defensive shield. He looked up at the divine art light raining down on him and actually opened his arms. If not for the divine light radiating from his body and him using some sort of divine ability or mystic technique, anyone would think that he was waiting for death. After all, he looked as though he was hugging the divine light blades. Borrowing strength to fight strength, a tooth for a tooth. Double rebound. Ji Tianxing bellowed as he released boundless black and white divine light that condensed into a gigantic ball of light. The ball of light was black and white, spinning rapidly like a yin-yang diagram. The two energies fused together, appearing extremely mysterious and profound. Bam! 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 The boundless divine art light blades rained down on the black and white ball of light, producing a series of dull booms. What happened next left everyone dumbfounded. The thousands of divine art light blades did not shatter. Instead, they pierced into the black and white ball of light and passed through it unscathed, accelerating toward the surrounding higher divine lords. On the surface, the divine art light blades did not seem to have changed. However, everyone was an expert and could clearly sense that after the divine art light blades passed through the black and white ball of light, not only did they double in speed, their power also double. Clearly, Ji Tianxing was borrowing strength to fight strength. He was using the attacks of the divine lords to multiply their power before changing targets to attack those higher divine lords. He did not expend much energy, but the power of his attacks was abnormally terrifying. Boom! 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 The next moment, the thousands of divine light blades struck the surrounding divine lords, producing deafening booms. Those high divine lords all exploded into balls of dazzling divine light, blood and bits of flesh that filled the sky. In the blink of an eye, more than 30 higher divine lords were severely injured, their divine bodies crumbling on the spot. Only a few of them were relatively lucky. After their divine bodies were destroyed, they still had a divine spark left. They fled the battlefield in a panic. As for the divine lords who were struck, their divine bodies and divine sparks crumbled together, dying on the spot. Both sides had only exchanged one blow, but Ji Tianxing had already dealt a heavy blow to his opponents with his incomparably exquisite and bizarre divine abilities and secret techniques. Nearly 100 higher divine lords had been reduced by a third. The remaining 60-odd divine lords were also frightened out of their wits, their eyes filled with deep fear. The Golden Dragon Domain Lord and Jing Feihong also widened their eyes in disbelief. They could not help but exclaim, "What's going on? It's only been a month. How did he become stronger again? Damn it. Wasn't he clearly injured before? Why is he completely fine? Why did he become even more ferocious?" Jing Feihong and the Golden Dragon Domain Lord could not understand. They could not believe their eyes. God King Stellar Aspect's brows were tightly knitted together as his expression turned even darker. A cold glint flashed in his eyes. Even Yank and Chao Qingyu were shocked by Ji Tianxing and could not help but exclaim, "Wow! Young master, what divine ability is this? Why have I never seen you use it before? Young master, this divine ability of yours is simply incomparably exquisite and invincible. What's its name?" Chapter 3402. Double Reflection. It's a divine ability that I figured out on my own when I was in seclusion. This is my first time using it. Let's test it out on them. Ji Tianxing smiled and explained to Yank and Chao Qingyu. Indeed, this divine ability mystic art was something he had figured out and created from the heaven vanquishing array diagram. Today was his first time using it, and the effects were pretty good. He was very satisfied. Of course, he also felt that this divine ability was not perfect. There were still many areas that could be improved upon. Only through actual combat could he discover the flaws and improve upon them in the future. Double reflection. Chao Qingyu and Yank frowned as they looked at Ji Tianxing with odd expressions. Young master, isn't the name you gave to this divine ability a little too casual? Your Excellency, this divine ability is so wondrous and powerful. I think you should give it a domineering name and not be so sloppy and perfunctory. Ji Tianxing had always been good at listening to different opinions. He thought seriously for a moment and nodded. All right, this name is indeed something I came up with at the last minute. It's a little sloppy. However, it's just a name. It's pretty good to be simple and straightforward. No matter how intimidating the name is, if the divine ability itself isn't exquisite enough, isn't it useless? Therefore, there's no need for the two of you to argue about the name. I think it's pretty good. Ah! Chao Qingyu was stunned and did not know whether to laugh or cry. Yank thought seriously for a moment and nodded. Your Excellency, what you said makes a lot of sense. I agree. Just as he said that, Chao Qingyu glared at him and said with a mocking smile, Yank, your bootlicking skills have improved, huh? Not far away, God King Stellar Aspect saw Ji Tianxing and company talking and laughing. He was immediately enraged and even angrier. Bastard! Do you think this king doesn't exist? Too arrogant. Courting death. God King Stellar Aspect roared angrily as he waved his hand again and gave the order to attack. Those 60+ high divine lords all looked like they had yet to recover from their shock, their hearts full of hesitation and hesitation. Everyone looked at each other. After a moment of hesitation, they reluctantly brandished their swords and sabers, launching a second round of attacks on Ji Tianxing and the other two. The Golden Dragon Realm Master and Jing Feihong also furrowed their brows in worry and anxiety. At that moment, Godly King Stellar Aspect turned his head to look at the two of them and bellowed angrily, "What are the two of you standing there for?" Huh! The ruler of the Golden Dragon domain was taken aback. Us! Jing Feihong pointed at the tip of his nose with a bitter expression. Both of them had been beaten up by Ji Tianxing before, leaving a shadow in their hearts. The ambush on Ji Tianxing was with Godly King Stellar Aspect present, so they did not plan on taking action. Unexpectedly, Godly King Stellar Aspect directly called him out. Nonsense. Do you want to watch a good show? Godly King Stellar Aspect glared angrily as he roared. The Golden Dragon Realm Master and Jing Feihong trembled in fright. They no longer dared to hesitate and could only bite the bullet and launch an attack. Bastard Tianxing, this king will fight it out with you. Bastard, hand over your life. The two of them roared angrily. They waved their divine weapons and used their most powerful techniques to attack Ji Tianxing and the other two. And at that moment, dozens of divine lords cast divine art shadows that filled the sky, drowning Ji Tianxing and company. The previous scene played out once again. Ji Tianxing's body emitted divine light that condensed into a gigantic black and white sphere of light that enveloped him, Yank, and Chao Qingyu. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. Thousands of divine art shadows and divine powers blasted into the black and white sphere of light. After the divine light passed through the sphere of light, it appeared several times more powerful. It blasted at the divine lords at a much faster speed. The tragedy from before played out once again. Boom, boom, boom. Another 40-odd high-level divine lords were struck by the thousands of divine light blades. They were instantly turned into fireworks that emitted resplendent divine light. Of course, it was inevitable that a rain of blood would splatter across the sky. Countless bits of flesh and bone would scatter. None of the 40-odd divine lords that were struck survived. All of them were reduced to ashes, their divine heads crumbling. There were only 20 or so high-level divine lords left, and they retreated in horror. They were so frightened that their guts were torn, and they did not dare to attack again. No matter what divine art they used or how powerful their combat strength was, they could not harm a single hair on Ji Tianxing's body. Instead, they would suffer double the damage and die to their own divine arts. What the hell is this? It's too strange and sinister, isn't it? How do I deal with it? What can I do? I'm also in despair. The 20-odd divine lords had all given up. They had lost all will to fight and were like eggplants that had been beaten by frost. Not far away, God King Stellar Aspect witnessed all of this with his own eyes. He could not help but clench his fists in anger. Damn it! He was actually using those divine monarchs as whetstones to test out his newly created divine ability. Furthermore, he only used it once and was able to discover the flaws of the divine art and improve it. When he used that divine art again, its might would be 50% stronger and more natural. This punk's talent and perception are truly frightening. God King Stellar Aspect was also extremely shocked. He was rather wary of Ji Tianxing. He had a premonition that Ji Tianxing was probably the strongest and most difficult opponent he had encountered during his inspection of the continent. Meanwhile, the Golden Dragon Region Lord and Jing Feihong also charged over with their weapons. They used divine arts that could sunder heaven and earth as they ruthlessly blasted at Ji Tianxing. As long as we are fast enough, he won't be able to reflect our attacks in time. Furthermore, if we join forces and attack together, as long as the power exceeds what he can withstand, he won't be able to reflect it and will only be severely injured. The two region lords exchanged looks and communicated with their divine senses. They were filled with confidence. They were both godly monarch experts, so they naturally understood the profundity of Ji Tianxing's divine art. They could also guess how to counter it. As long as their attacks were powerful enough to destroy the black and white ball of light, Ji Tianxing wouldn't be able to reflect it. However, dreams were beautiful, but reality was cruel. Swoosh, swoosh. The divine arts used by the two region lords struck the black and white ball of light, but it was like a clay ox entering the sea. It didn't cause any ripples. The next instant, an even more dazzling divine art shadow flew out of the black and white ball of light. Its power had doubled, and it blasted towards the two region lords with a destructive force. Oh no! He still managed to reflect it. It's over. Dodge. The Golden Dragon Region Lord and Jing Feihong's expressions changed drastically. They revealed intense fear in their eyes as they retreated in panic. Boom. Boom. The light of the divine spell, which could destroy heaven and earth, blasted into the two of them, causing an earth-shattering explosion. The two of them were sent flying. They opened their mouths and let out heart-wrenching screams as divine blood splattered all over their bodies. With just one strike, the Golden Dragon Region Lord and Jing Feihong were severely injured. They fell from the sky covered in blood. The Golden Dragon Region Lord had one of his legs severed, while Jing Feihong's waist had a bowl-sized bloody hole. Their injuries were extremely tragic. Chapter 3403. Things were different now. In the past, when the two domain lords fought with Ji Tianxing, they would have to exchange a few hundred blows before a victor was decided. Now, Ji Tianxing had risen by a realm and his combat strength had increased by more than 10 times. He had even created a powerful divine power. The two domain lords were severely injured after exchanging a single blow with him. Not only were the two domain masters unable to accept such a drastic change, they were also inexplicably shocked. Even Ji Tianxing himself was somewhat surprised. The corners of his mouth curled into a teasing smile. I'm already that powerful. Interesting. I wonder how powerful my combat strength will be when I return to peak godly monarch. I'm really looking forward to it, Ji Tianxing muttered to himself. His emotions were surging and he was filled with anticipation. At that moment, of the nearly 100 divine lords, there were only slightly more than 20 left. Furthermore, they were scared out of their wits and did not dare attack again. They had no combat strength to speak of. The two domain lords were also severely injured. Their confidence and fighting spirit had suffered a heavy blow and they had yet to recover from their shock. The only person who remained unscathed and had not attacked was godly King Stellar Aspect. He could no longer pretend to be aloof and arrogant. All he could do was attack. Kid, you do have some tricks up your sleeve. It's no wonder the two domain lords suffered greatly and could only seek help from this king. You are not bad. However, only an expert like you is worthy of being this king's opponent. You are worthy of this king finishing personally. Godly King Stellar Aspect flexed his fists as he flapped his 6-colored wings. The blood pupil on his forehead also emitted a dark red divine light. His body ignited with towering sanguine flames as he released a suppressive might that swept towards Ji Tianxing and company. Kid, your performance ends here. With this king personally taking action, you can rest in peace. As he spoke, godly King Stellar Aspect conjured a divine seal with both hands as he used his divine power. Swish, swish. The 8 bronze spears hanging from his waist automatically flew into the sky. They lit up with a blinding light as they emitted an unparalleled sharpness. Kill. Godly King Stellar Aspect bellowed as the 8 bronze spears flew out like bolts of lightning, attacking Ji Tianxing from different directions. Each of the bronze spears was a mid-level king-level divine artifact. They contained the power to pierce through everything. They pierced through the sky like auroras, heading straight for the black and white glowing balls. Inside the ball of light, Ji Tianxing, Yank, and Chao Qingyu's expressions turned grave. In the face of the two domain masters and the divine lords, they could not care less and be full of confidence. However, godly King Stellar aspect posed a great threat to them. The slightest bit of carelessness would put their lives in danger. After all, the difference in strength between the two sides was too great. Ji Tianxing did not say a word. Instead, he silently activated his divine power and activated the power of the black and white ball of light to its maximum. Bang! Bang bang bang! In the next moment, the 8 bronze spears pierced the black and white ball of light, causing a loud explosion that shook the 9 heavens. This time, the black and white ball of light couldn't withstand it, and it couldn't reflect twice as much. With a loud boom, the black and white ball of light crumbled on the spot, exploding into divine light fragments that blotted out the sky. Ji Tianxing was sent flying as his divine power backlashed his organs. Golden divine blood gushed out of his mouth and nose. Yank and Chao Qingyu were also swept up by the shockwave. They flew more than 100 kilometers in a wretched state, their faces pale as they gasped for breath. Thankfully, after the 8 bronze spears shattered the black and white ball of light, their might was nearly depleted as they were sent flying back by the shockwave. Upon seeing this, godly King Stellar aspect heaved a sigh of relief as he revealed a contemptuous sneer. He. This king thought you were very strong. I really overestimated you. He was still worried that he might fail to shatter the black and white ball of light in one strike and suffer a double rebound. Not only would that embarrass him in front of everyone, but his life would also be in danger. He would definitely be in a wretched state. Therefore, he went all out from the start, hoping to shatter it in one strike. Thankfully, he did it. He saved his face, injured Ji Tianxing, and sent Yank and Chao Qingyu flying. Not far away, the Golden Dragon Domain Lord, Jing Feihong, and more than 20 divine lords revealed looks of pleasant surprise as they cheered and shouted. All hail the divine envoy, as expected of the divine envoy who patrols vast heaven and upholds justice. He's just too powerful. With the divine envoy here, those 3 bastards will definitely be executed. Not only were the 2 domain lords and many divine lords excited, they regained their confidence and anticipation. Even the thousands of god monarchs who were watching the battle in secret from 10,000 miles away were discussing animatedly. Their spirits were high. At this point, they had already figured out the identities of the people present through their observation and eavesdropping. The arrival of the 2 domain lords had already shocked and excited them. The existence of divine envoy vast heaven was something many divine lords had never heard of. They were even more excited. In the eyes of many divine lords, divine envoy vast heaven was above the domain lords. He was a lofty and rarely seen noble figure. Now, divine envoy vast heaven had personally come to the Golden Dragon Abyss to uphold justice for the Golden Dragon domain. They were extremely lucky to be able to witness this scene with their own eyes. Therefore, when they saw divine envoy vast heaven display his might and defeat Ji Tianxing and company in one strike, countless divine lords cheered and shouted. Everyone's cheers and flattery, as well as countless passionate and worshipful gazes, made divine King Stellar aspect very happy and satisfied. This was the feeling he wanted. While he was on cloud 9, his confidence also multiplied and he was in high spirits. He was in no hurry to pursue Ji Tianxing and company. He looked down at them from above and shouted proudly, "Brat, do you now understand the difference between you and me? Arrogance and conceit are useless. Being executed is your only way out. Surrender obediently, and I can give you a dignified death." In the sky 50 kilometers away, Ji Tianxing raised his sleeve to wipe away the blood at the corner of his mouth as he silently circulated his energy to suppress his internal injuries. Yank and Chao Qingyu stood behind him as they circulated their energy to suppress their injuries. They glared at divine King Stellar aspect with resentful eyes. "Young master, how are your injuries? Are you all right? Master, what do we do now? Do we continue fighting him?" Both of them looked at Ji Tianxing, waiting for him to make a decision. Yank came from the Chaos continent and had no sense of belonging to the boundless Heaven continent, nor did he revere it. Therefore, he did not care about the other party's identity. Chao Qingyu was a citizen of the boundless Heaven continent and should revere and obey the orders of divine envoy Vast Heaven. However, he had left Vast Heaven for nearly 10,000 years. He did not have any concept of reverence for divine envoy Vast Heaven and the Azura God Emperor. Therefore, he did not think of submitting. He only listened to Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing frowned and thought for a moment before sending a voice transmission. It's not convenient for us to fight here. There are several divine arrays set up around the deep abyss that have not been activated for the time being. I believe that they are trump cards they left behind to deal us a fatal blow at the critical moment. Furthermore, there are dozens of factions and thousands of divine lords watching the battle from afar. If Divine Envoy Vast Heaven and the Golden Dragon Domain Lord are forced into a corner and order those divine lords to join the battle, we will truly be unable to escape. Therefore, we have to leave this place first and shake off those divine lords before continuing the slaughter. Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 3404. Chao Qingyu and Yank naturally approved of Ji Tianxing's decision. Furthermore, what he said was the truth, which was also what they were most worried about. No one had any objections and immediately turned to flee. The trio was more than 300 kilometers away from the edge of the abyss entrance. Under normal circumstances, they could teleport 500 kilometers away from the abyss entrance. But, in the battle just now, the Golden Dragon Domain Lord and Jing Feihong had secretly activated a massive array. It was a sealing formation that released a formless divine power that enveloped an area of 1,000 miles, sealing off this space. The reason for doing so was to prevent Ji Tianxing and company from escaping. Therefore, it was impossible for him to teleport away. They could only turn and fly away, charging through the invisible sealing array. Swish! Divine light flashed as Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu, and Yank turned at the same time and charged toward the edge of the abyss entrance at their fastest speed. They were like bolts of lightning that tore through the sky, erupting with pitilessly sharp auras. Upon seeing this, God King Stellar Aspect, the Golden Dragon Domain Lord, and Jing Feihong were stunned. They clearly did not expect that Ji Tianxing and company would suddenly turn and flee when they were brimming with confidence earlier. Even if God King Stellar Aspect attacked and injured them in one move, there was no need for them to be so frightened, right? While God King Stellar Aspect and company were still in a daze, Ji Tianxing and company had already flown more than 150 kilometers, crossing half the distance. God King Stellar Aspect was the first to react as he hurriedly ordered, "Stop them. Activate the array. We can't let them escape." Upon hearing the order, the Golden Dragon Domain Lord and Jing Feihong snapped out of their daze and hurriedly cast their arts to activate another divine array. This was a powerful killing array that could release 108,000 sharp blades of divine light that drowned the target like a torrential rain, destroying everything. However, the array was previously invisible, so it would take some time to activate it suddenly. At the very least, they would not be able to make it in time before Ji Tianxing and company escaped. The Golden Dragon Region's Domain Master and Jing Feihong were sweating profusely, but there was nothing they could do. The moment Godly King Stellar Aspect saw the turn of events, he knew that he would not be able to stop them in time. Without any hesitation, he powered the 8 bronze spears to attack Ji Tianxing and company. Whoosh! Whoosh whoosh whoosh! The divine spear pierced through the air like an aurora, instantly traversing 500 miles and catching up to Ji Tianxing and the other two. Every single spear emitted a dazzling light. Carrying an unparalleled murderous intent, they pierced towards the vital points of the 3 people. Suddenly, Ji Tianxing and the other 2 fell into a dilemma. If they continued to run forward and ignored the 8 divine spears, they would definitely be pierced by the divine spears and suffer heavy injuries. If they were to cast spells to block and intercept the 8 divine spears, they would have to stop. Even if they didn't stop, their speed would be slowed down and they would be delayed. In that case, the Golden Dragon Domain Master and Jing Feihong would have enough time to activate the invisible killing formation. At that time, the 2 divine formations would operate at the same time, which would definitely bring them great pressure. No matter how capable they were, It would take them a very long time to crack the two monarch-level divine formations. It was likely that godly King Stellar Aspect would lead his group to surround them before they could crack the two arrays. They would still be surrounded and unable to escape danger. Furthermore, their situation would only become more perilous. At this critical juncture, Chao Qingyu and Yang were filled with anxiety, unsure of what to do. Only Ji Tianxing was as calm as usual, and he was already prepared. He instantly conjured the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes pagoda and sucked Yang and Chao Qingyu into it. Swish! With a white flash, Yang and Chao Qingyu vanished. Only Ji Tianxing was still running, and his speed had increased by a few notches. The 8 divine spears adjusted their direction slightly and locked onto him as they sped up. At that moment, Ji Tianxing conjured the burial of heaven and used a technique that he had not used in a long time. Man soared as one. Swish! With a dazzling golden flash, Ji Tianxing's figure also vanished. He fused with the burial of heaven, becoming a 10,000-foot-long divine sword that shone with resplendent golden light. The 300 seals on the burial of heaven were all activated. The 300 divine Tao laws were also activated at the same time, raising its strength to the limit. In addition to Ji Tianxing's strength augmentation, the burial of heaven's strength doubled. The gigantic sword was like a blinding sun as it tore through the sky at the speed of light. It instantly shook off the 8 ancient bronze divine spears and ruthlessly slammed into the invisible ceiling array. The next instant, the gigantic divine sword stabbed into the invisible ceiling light wall, producing a loud boom that shook the 9 heavens. Boom! The loud boom shook the heavens, spreading for thousands of kilometers. Resplendent golden light bloomed, producing tens of thousands of divine light fragments that scattered in all directions. In the seemingly empty sky, a huge vortex also burst out, causing ripples that resembled stormy waves. Without a doubt, the invisible ceiling array had been blasted open. A huge hole had been blasted open in the invisible ceiling light wall, and dense cracks had appeared on it. Although the 10,000-foot-long golden sword also had many cracks, and countless divine light fragments were scattered. Those were only sword radiances, not the actual body of the burial of heaven. The burial of heaven was a mid-king level divine artifact, and it was already very powerful. Furthermore, it had fused with Ji Tianxing, so its strength was even more terrifying. It was reasonable that it could break open a mid-king level ceiling array. Swish! After escaping the ceiling array, the gigantic golden sword did not slow down at all. It continued to fly south. At this moment, the Golden Dragon Domain Ruler and Jing Feihong activated the second invisible killing array. A 5-colored light screen with a radius of 1,000 miles appeared, enveloping the entire entrance to the abyss and releasing 108,000 sharp blades of divine light. Terrifying killing intent and divine power poured down from the screen of light, covering 1,000 miles of the sky. However, all of this was too late. The Golden Dragon Domain Ruler and Jing Feihong were dumbfounded. They were shocked and resentful as they muttered indignantly, "Damn it! We actually let them escape. How could this be?" That ceiling divine array was personally set up by Sir Divine Envoy. Originally, Jing Feihong wanted to express that the ceiling array set up by godly King Stellar Aspect was very powerful, and that Ji Tianxing definitely could not break through it. However, godly King Stellar Aspect's face darkened when he heard that. He glared coldly at Jing Feihong. Clearly, godly King Stellar Aspect had not expected Ji Tianxing to be able to break through the divine array he had set up and so easily escape the encirclement. He was shocked, but Jing Feihong had said it in front of everyone. He had lost face, so he was naturally resentful. "What are you waiting for? Why aren't you chasing after them?" Seeing the Golden Dragon Domain Ruler and Jing Feihong's vexation, godly King Stellar Aspect bellowed coldly. With that said, he took the lead and flew through the abyss entrance. Riding on the 8 divine spears, he charged south as fast as lightning. The 8 divine spears were arranged in 2 rows under his feet. They carried him as fast as a stream of light. The Golden Dragon Domain Ruler and Jing Feihong were taken aback for a moment before regaining their senses. They hurriedly chased south. The 20-odd high-rank divine lords hesitated for a moment, but they could only bite the bullet and follow. Book Guest Residence Reading Website. Chapter 3405. Whoosh. High in the sky, above the white sea of clouds, a golden sword beam streaked past. This 10,000-foot-long golden sword beam was the sword of burial of heaven that had fused with Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing had long forgotten how many years it had been since he had fused with the sword of burial of heaven to fight an enemy. After all, the enemies he had encountered in the past were not strong enough, and the situation was not dangerous enough. With his own strength and means, he could usually resolve them. In addition, the sword of burial of heaven's grade had not increased, so it was not very powerful. Even after fusing with the sword of burial of heaven, it did not improve by much. But it was different now. The sword of burial of heaven went from a supreme monarch divine artifact to a medial monarch divine artifact. A divine artifact of this grade was rare in the divine world. It was enough to deal with most dangerous situations. Ji Tianxing's fusion with the sword of burial of heaven was like adding wings to a tiger. The facts proved that this was indeed the case. Even the sealing divine array personally set up by godly King Stellar Aspect had been destroyed by the sword of burial of heaven. Ji Tianxing was even more confident in defeating godly King Stellar Aspect. Even though he had already fled the abyss entrance and was nearly 5,000 kilometers south, he did not slow down. However, he did not slow down, nor did he remove the fusion with the Heavenpiercer sword. 5,000 kilometers was still too short. Godly King Stellar Aspect would soon catch up. Once he was held back by godly King Stellar Aspect, the Golden Dragon Domain Lord, Jing Feihong, and the other divine lords would immediately follow. Ji Tianxing had long planned to stay at least 50,000 kilometers away from the abyss entrance. He would wait for godly King Stellar Aspect and the Golden Dragon Domain Lord to open up some distance before stopping to fight. In short, it was to try not to be surrounded. It was best to split up and defeat them one by one. 500 kilometers behind the sword of burial of heaven. Godly King Stellar Aspect was standing on 8 divine spears as he sped forward like a stream of light. No matter how fast the burial of heaven's sword was, he used all his strength and clenched his teeth to keep up with it. He didn't let the distance between them widen. His expression was as gloomy as ice. He stared coldly at the sword of burial of heaven and muttered to himself, "Despicable little bastard. Today, not only are there 2 domain lords, there are also a few thousand monarchs staring at this king. Everyone is full of reverence and fanaticism towards this king. If I let you escape from under my nose, wouldn't I be criticized and laughed at in secret for many years? At that time, not only will I be too ashamed to face anyone, even His Highness the God Emperor will lose face. Don't even think about escaping from the palm of my hand. Even if I have to chase you to the end of the continent, to the shore of the heavenly sea, I will still kill you." Just as he said that, God King Stellar Aspect discovered that the burial of heaven had sped up again. Therefore, he could only explode with even more divine power and increase his speed by a little bit while gnashing his teeth. Even though accelerating like this would consume his divine power rapidly, and he would be completely drained in 2 or 3 days at most. However, he could not relax. He could only speed up again and again. This was because he believed that Ji Tianxing would not be much better off if his divine power was being rapidly drained. In terms of strength, Ji Tianxing would definitely not be his match. About 400 kilometers behind God King Stellar Aspect, the Golden Dragon Domain Lord and Jing Feihong were flying side by side, following closely behind. The two were filled with vexation and resentment, and their expressions were somewhat bitter. After all, the 2 of them had been severely injured by Ji Tianxing, missing an arm or a leg. Not only had their strength decreased by 30 to 40%, but their bodies were also suffering immense pain. Furthermore, they did not have the time to recuperate. They could only rely on their divine power to suppress their injuries. Yet, Ji Tianxing had escaped, and God King Stellar Aspect was chasing after him with all his might. They could not possibly stay where they were and wait for God King Stellar Aspect's report of victory. They could only endure the pain and unleash their divine power at all costs to barely keep up with God King Stellar Aspect's footsteps. Even so, with the passage of time, they were left further and further behind. However, no matter how far they were left behind, they had to follow as usual. This was a matter of attitude, and also a show for God King Stellar Aspect. Otherwise, God King stellar aspect would help them take revenge and pursue Ji Tianxing with all his might while they waited for the outcome. They would definitely offend God King stellar aspect, and their future days would definitely be difficult. At this moment, the two of them could only pray in their hearts, hoping that God King stellar aspect would catch up to Ji Tianxing as soon as possible. As long as God King stellar aspect held back Ji Tianxing, they would be able to arrive in time. The 20 or so upper deity lords who had survived were the pillars of the Cloud region and the Golden Dragon region. They had come on the orders of the two domain lords to surround and ambush Ji Tianxing. In the present situation, with God King stellar aspect and the two domain lords pursuing Ji Tianxing, they could only follow. Even if they were left far behind, more than 1,000 kilometers away from the two domain lords, they could not stop. After all, anyone who did not follow would be defying the two domain lords' orders. However, they were only divine lords. Even if they tried their best, it was impossible for them to keep up with the God Kings. They were destined to be left behind. In the first 15 minutes, they were still able to maintain a distance of 20,000 kilometers from the two domain lords. They could use their divine senses to detect them. 30 minutes later, they had been left behind 40,000 kilometers, and the two domain lords were nowhere to be seen. Even using their divine senses to investigate was useless. They had lost track of their pursuers on the spot. However, they could only grit their teeth and continue heading south. Besides, behind the 20-odd divine lords, about 20,000 kilometers away, there were 20-odd divine warships following. Each divine warship represented a faction, and there were dozens of divine lords on board. Previously, when the three God Kings attacked Ji Tianxing, they had hidden 30,000 kilometers away to watch the battle. Through watching the battle, they understood the identities of God King stellar aspect, the two domain lords, and Ji Tianxing. Later, when they saw Ji Tianxing and company flee, God King stellar aspect began his pursuit. The 40-odd factions also fell into hesitation. Many busybodies followed on their divine warships. Firstly, they wanted to watch the excitement. They did not want to miss the once-in-a-lifetime battle between God Kings. Secondly, they wanted to take advantage of the opportunity to perform in front of the domain lords and divine envoys. If they were lucky enough to catch the eye of the domain lords and divine envoys, they would be promoted and rewarded. Even if they were not appreciated, they would be extremely lucky to be able to watch a battle between God Kings with their own eyes. Therefore, more than 20 factions drove their divine warships to the south at their fastest speed. However, there were also 20-odd factions that acted more conservatively and calmly. They knew that they could not catch up to the God Kings, nor were they qualified to participate in a battle between God Kings. Therefore, they decided not to join in the fun. As for the final outcome of the battle, they did not need to watch the battle. They would know sooner or later. This was because this matter would definitely cause a stir in the Golden Dragon region and spread to the surrounding regions. It would be known by all the gods in the world. Furthermore, to the divine lords of these factions, there was no suspense to the outcome of the battle. No matter how strong the three God Kings were or how brilliant their methods were, it was useless. In the boundless heaven continent, no one could defeat the divine envoy of God Emperor, much less challenge the rules and authority of His Majesty. Chapter 3406. At that moment, the sun was setting in the west. It had been 2 hours since Ji Tianxing escaped from the abyss entrance. During this time, he had fused with the sword of burial of heaven and continuously flew 500,000 kilometers. If he did not count the continuous teleportation, this was already his fastest speed. This was despite the fact that flying at such a high intensity would greatly drain his divine power. However, his flight this time was mainly powered by the sword of burial of heaven, with him assisting from the side. With his current strength, coupled with the sword of burial of heaven, he could last 10 days and nights without rest before his divine power ran dry. It was just 2 hours, so it did not affect his combat strength much. At that moment, he was flying over a vast mountain range. He was surrounded by endless mountain peaks and valleys. This place is a mountain range with a radius of 200,000 kilometers. It's desolate and uninhabited, perfect for a battle. I've already flown nearly 500,000 kilometers. With the Golden Dragon Region Lord and Jing Feihong's speed, they should be tens of thousands of kilometers behind. As for those divine lords, they should be at least 200,000 kilometers behind. They won't be able to catch up in another 2 hours. Then let's settle it here. With this thought flashing through his mind, Ji Tianxing stopped the burial of heaven and removed the fusion with the burial of heaven. Swish! He appeared in the sky, holding the sword of burial of heaven that had returned to its original state. He turned around and looked behind him. He saw God King Stellar Aspect riding 8 divine spears in the sky 500 kilometers to the north as he sped over like a stream of light. After flying for an hour, God King Stellar Aspect did not feel tired at all. At the same time, he continued to follow Ji Tianxing closely without being shaken off. During the pursuit, he had been left more than 500 kilometers behind several times. However, he would always use teleportation in time to instantly close the distance. He had already made plans to pursue Ji Tianxing for a long period of time. He was also prepared to compete in endurance with Ji Tianxing. He had long predicted that in about 3 days, Ji Tianxing's strength would weaken, allowing him to catch up. However, he never expected that Ji Tianxing would stop above the mountain range. Upon seeing this, God King Stellar Aspect was overjoyed, but he also became even more vigilant and wary. Damned little bastard, why did you suddenly stop? Could it be that he had run out of energy and knew that he couldn't escape? No. Looking at his calm and composed appearance, it didn't seem like he was lacking in strength. Could it be that he had reinforcements and had set up an ambush here in advance to lure me here? That's possible. I have to be careful. With this in mind, Godly King Stellar Aspect slowed down and stopped 50 kilometers away from Ji Tianxing. He stared coldly at Ji Tianxing as he released his divine sense, performed his divine sense, and used his divine sense to check if there were any traps or ambushes around. Seeing him so cautious, Ji Tianxing could not help sneering and mocking. Ha ha ha. Even the Oracle of Haotian is scared out of his wits and becomes so cautious. Didn't you say that the boundless heaven continent was the territory of the Azura God Emperor, and that it was all within your jurisdiction? Why? Are you afraid that I have reinforcements and will ambush you here? Having his thoughts exposed, Godly King Stellar Aspect's face turned red and he was furious. He glared at Ji Tianxing and retaliated, not to be outdone. Kid, you're not from the Golden Dragon region and have no foundation here. What are you going to use to ambush me? Besides, is this king someone that any Tom, Dick, or Harry can ambush me? I think this mountain range is not bad. It's desolate and uninhabited. It's suitable for you to be buried here. Ji Tianxing laughed even more mockingly as he waved his hand. It was clearly me who chose this place to be your burial ground. It looks like you're quite satisfied. Shameless boasting. Godly King Stellar Aspect snorted and sneered disdainfully. In my opinion, it's clearly your lack of strength. You know that you can't escape from me, so you might as well stop and accept your death. The sooner you die, the sooner you can reincarnate. Ji Tianxing did not take the initiative to attack, so Godly King Stellar Aspect was in no hurry to attack. He was delaying because he knew that the Golden Dragon Region Lord and Jing Feihong were definitely following behind and would catch up in a while. Ji Tianxing naturally thought of the problem that Godly King Stellar Aspect could think of as well. He raised his eyebrows and sneered with a playful tone. It looks like you're still a coward. You were shouting to kill me in an aggressive manner, but now, you're deliberately delaying for time and waiting for reinforcements to arrive. I can't be bothered to waste my breath on you. Since you're in hot pursuit, die. With that said, Ji Tianxing formed a sword seal with his left hand and held the burial of heaven with his right hand. He pointed at the firmament and shouted coldly, "Sword rain." As his voice sounded, 28,000 silver specks of starlight lit up in the originally calm firmament. Every speck of starlight was a 20,000-foot-long astral sword that contained vast and mighty astral divine power. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. More than 20,000 astral swords rained down from the firmament like meteors, enveloping a radius of 2,500 kilometers. Before the sword flashes arrived, a formless divine might that suppressed the world had already enveloped the area. Godly King Stellar Aspect endured immense pressure, but his expression did not change. His body was as straight as a spear, and his eyes remained sharp. "Punk, how can this king let you live any longer if you're in such a hurry to die?" As he spoke, godly King Stellar Aspect formed a divine seal with both hands. He conjured the 8 ancient bronze divine spears and stabbed them at Ji Tianxing. As for the sword rain that rained down from the sky, he temporarily ignored it. This was because he wanted to interrupt Ji Tianxing's casting before the sword rain descended and the sword array formed. If he could take the opportunity to heavily injure Ji Tianxing, that would naturally be for the best. However, godly King Stellar Aspect had underestimated Ji Tianxing and made the wrong judgment. Ordinary godly monarchs had to continue casting their spells without any distractions when using a divine power like the heaven-vanquishing sword array. Against the 8 divine spears, they could only choose to cancel their casting and defend with all their might. However, Ji Tianxing was different. After summoning more than 20,000 divine swords from outer space, he could ignore them. The 28,000 astral swords would continue descending and automatically form the heaven-vanquishing sword array. The 8 divine spears stabbed at Ji Tianxing from different directions, aiming straight for his vitals. Ji Tianxing let out a low roar and used his ultimate divine ability, Absolute Shadows of the 10 Directions. Immediately, his body lit up with resplendent white light as his figure turned blurry. The next instant, white light flashed as his true body vanished. And in the sky, there were actually 3 Ji Tianxings. All of them had white robes, black hair, black eyes, and black swords. Be it appearance, eyes, or bearing, there was no difference. Without a doubt, this was Absolute Shadow Avatar. The last time Ji Tianxing used Absolute Shadow Avatar, he was only at the first firmament godly monarch realm. He could only conjure one avatar. But now, he had broken through to the second firmament godly monarch realm, so the number of avatars he had increased to 2. Together with his true body, there were naturally 3 of him. Godly King Stellar Aspect was immediately stunned as he glared angrily. He could not help but exclaim, "Phantom? Or Avatar?" He was a middle-level godly monarch and also a supreme heaven divine envoy. He was naturally knowledgeable. Although he did not cultivate in avatar arts, he had seen them before. He had also exchanged blows with godly monarchs who had grasped avatar arts. Chapter 3407. With godly King Stellar Aspect's experience, there were 2 possibilities for the situation before him. Either Ji Tianxing had used an illusion art to hide his true body, leaving behind 3 illusions to confuse him. Or he had used an avatar art to create 2 avatars to assist him in battle. But be it the illusion art or the avatar art, they left godly King Stellar Aspect stunned for a moment. He was momentarily unable to find a target. The 8 divine spears also paused for a moment, unsure of which target to attack. Thankfully, godly King Stellar Aspect was experienced and had the 3-eyed blood pupil. The blood pupil on his forehead suddenly opened as it emitted a dark red divine light. He instantly made a judgment. It was an avatar art, not an illusion. However, the 3 Ji Tianxing were identical. Which one was the true body and which 2 were the avatars? Time was of the essence. Godly King Stellar Aspect did not have the time to use his blood pupil mystic art to carefully distinguish between the avatars and the true body. He controlled the 8 ancient bronze divine spears to attack the 3 Ji Tianxing. The 2 figures on the left and right were locked onto by 2 divine spears. The figure in the middle withstood the attacks of 3 divine spears. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. Sharp sonic booms sounded as the 8 ancient bronze divine spears emitted divine light once again as they sped up. However, the 3 Ji Tianxing remained calm and composed. They brandished the burial of heaven at the same time, slashing out sword flashes that filled the sky. Bam! 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 The resplendent sword flashes that blotted out the sky happened to block the 8 ancient bronze divine spears. The intense collision produced a dull boom. The sword flashes shattered as divine light fragments filled the sky. The ancient bronze spears were also sent flying back in front of godly King Stellar Aspect. Even though godly King Stellar Aspect's attack had been neutralized and failed to achieve any results, it was not as if he had gained nothing. At the very least, the reactions of the 3 Ji Tianxing allowed him to distinguish between the true body and the true body. The two Ji Tianxing on the left and right were sent flying back 10,000 feet. Their breathing was somewhat hurried, and their divine powers were clearly lacking. As for the figure in the middle, he was only sent flying back about 2,000 feet. His expression remained indifferent, and his aura remained sharp. Godly King Stellar Aspect immediately understood that the figure in the middle was Ji Tianxing's true body. The figures on the left and right were two clones. Furthermore, the strength of the doppelganger was far inferior to the strength of the main body. It was only about half of the original strength. Do you think you can fool me with a mere body separation technique? Godly King Stellar Aspect snorted coldly in disdain. He was just about to control the ancient bronze divine spear to attack Ji Tianxing's true body with all his might. However, at this moment, the 28,000 star swords suddenly descended, covering a radius of 5,000 miles. Swoosh! Swish swish swish! Dazzling sword light flashed as tens of thousands of starry swords flew back and forth, forming a huge sword formation between heaven and earth. In just one breath's time, a sword formation with a radius of 5,000 miles appeared. It was like a heavenly curtain covering the mountains and the earth, sealing off this area. The other 18,000 gigantic swords rapidly danced in the sword array, forming dozens of blade tornadoes and more than 20 sword nets. They began their assault on Godly King Stellar Aspect. Swoosh! Swish swish swish! As danger approached, numerous blade tornadoes and sword nets surged at Godly King Stellar Aspect from every direction, immediately drowning his figure. Godly King Stellar Aspect could not be bothered with attacking Ji Tianxing. All he could do was cast his spells to fend off the tornadoes and sword nets. Heaven slaying 8 extremities. A bleak blade across the sky. Godly King Stellar Aspect wielded an ancient bronze divine spear in each hand as he used his ultimate divine power. He brandished spear flashes that blotted out the sky, destroying the tornadoes and sword nets one by one. At the same time, he was multitasking. He used his mind to control the other 6 ancient bronze divine spears to form a gigantic defensive net to protect himself. Even if he was engulfed by the blade tornadoes and attacked by thousands of gigantic swords, he could still use the ancient bronze divine spears to protect himself. While using all his strength to fend off the sword nets and tornadoes, he could also brandish his divine spears to launch a counterattack. However, he was already trapped by the heaven-vanquishing sword formation. He could not escape, nor did he have the extra strength to attack Ji Tianxing. As Ji Tianxing controlled the heaven-vanquishing sword formation to unleash an even stronger might to attack Godly King Stellar Aspect, he also brandished the Burial of Heaven to launch a ferocious assault. The situation on the battlefield changed. Ji Tianxing actually gained the upper hand and suppressed Godly King Stellar Aspect. Right on the heels of that, Ji Tianxing opened the 9 Heavens 10 Absolutes Pagoda. Swish! 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 3 divine beams of light flashed as Chao Qingyu, Yank, and Lana appeared. The 3 of them gave it their all as they cast all sorts of divine powers and ultimate skills to besiege Godly King Stellar Aspect. If not for Ji Tianxing, none of them would be Godly King Stellar Aspect's match. In a one-on-one battle, they would be slain in less than 100 moves. But things were different now. With Ji Tianxing at the front, he suppressed Godly King Stellar Aspect with all his strength, preventing him from retaliating. The 3 of them had no qualms as they unleashed their attacks to their heart's content, besieging Godly King Stellar Aspect with all their might. Godly King Stellar Aspect's situation was even more precarious. Before long, he was struck by the sword net. Several wounds appeared on his body as blood splattered out. He was filled with rage, but there was nothing he could do. All he could do was defend with all his might. But even so, he was still lacking in strength. There were gaps in his defenses as the wounds on his body continued to increase. Yet, Ji Tianxing, Yank, Chao Qingyu, and company were sneering mockingly as they constantly mocked him. As the mighty divine envoy of vast heaven, when had he ever been so aggrieved? He was so angry that his lungs were about to explode as he constantly roared and cursed. But the more he acted this way, the more pleased Ji Tianxing, Chao Qingyu, and company became. They engaged in a war of words with him, infuriating him. Another 30 minutes passed as Godly King Stellar Aspect's injuries worsened. He had suffered at least 30 sword wounds all over his body. The wounds were hideous and terrifying, deep enough to reveal his bones. Blood constantly flowed out, dyeing his armor red. Godly King Stellar Aspect was completely helpless. He knew that if this continued, his injuries would only worsen. Even if he did not die, he would suffer the pain of being dismembered. Therefore, he no longer counterattacked. He focused all his attention on controlling the 8 ancient bronze divine spears to form an impenetrable defensive barrier. Furthermore, he used his divine power to activate his king-level divine armor, enveloping his entire body like a metal giant. He defended with all his might, hoping to avoid being injured and preserve his strength as much as possible. He had to wait, patiently wait for the Golden Dragon Domain Lord, Jing Feihong, and the numerous Divine Lord experts. Once everyone arrived, they would attack from outside the Heaven Vanquishing Sword array. When that happened, he would launch a pincer attack with the Golden Dragon Domain Lord and company. Only then would they have a chance of cracking the Heaven Vanquishing Sword array and regaining the initiative. However, the moment Godly King Stellar Aspect made the change, Ji Tianxing saw through his intentions and guessed his thoughts. Ji Tianxing also adjusted his strategy in time, no longer diverting his attention to controlling the Heaven Vanquishing Sword array. He gripped the Burial of Heaven tightly with both hands and used his divine power, releasing his strongest attack. Celestial Dragon Tyrant Body. Ji Tianxing roared angrily as his body emitted a dazzling golden light. He immediately transformed into a giant golden-armored god 10,000 feet tall. Space-time Blade. He roared again as he gripped the Burial of Heaven with both hands and slashed at Godly King Stellar Aspect, slashing out a blazing white greatsword that was 10,000 feet long. Chapter 3408. The 100,000-foot-long space-time blade contained vast and mighty time and space divine powers. When this massive sword was used by the Sword of Burial of Heaven, its might was even more terrifying. Even though Godly King Stellar Aspect was enveloped in armor and protected by the barrier of light formed by the 8 divine spears, he still felt immense danger. But now that things had developed to this point, he guessed that Ji Tianxing's all-out attack was to force him to counterattack and take the opportunity to injure him. Therefore, he could only deal with the situation by maintaining the status quo and raising his defensive strength to the limit. The next instant, the space-time blade descended and cleaved at the defensive barrier formed by the 8 divine spears. Boom! With a crisp shattering sound, the 1,000-foot-wide barrier was cleaved in half on the spot, shattering into fragments that filled the sky. The 8 divine spears also swayed from the impact, with a few of them being sent flying. However, the space-time blade's strength did not weaken much. Its might was still terrifying. A tenth of an instant later, the space-time blade tore through the divine light fragments and struck Godly King Stellar Aspect. Bam! Another deafening boom reverberated through the sky. Godly King Stellar Aspect was sent flying as he tumbled 500 kilometers away. The bronze armor he wore was originally a medial-grade king-level divine artifact with extremely powerful defensive strength. However, after being struck by the space-time blade, a fissure split open, revealing a deep indentation. The indentation happened to be on Godly King Stellar Aspect's right shoulder. Large amounts of dark red blood seeped out from the fissure in the armor. Without a doubt, Godly King Stellar Aspect's right shoulder was severely injured. His scapula fractured on the spot, his meridians and bone marrow shattered. The excruciating pain caused his face to turn pale. He could not help but grunt as he felt infuriated. Only after flying 500 kilometers away did he manage to dissipate the terrifying impact and stabilize his body. He lowered his head to look at his right shoulder and discovered that it had clearly collapsed. His entire right arm swayed weakly. For the time being, this arm was crippled. He could no longer wield a divine spear to attack. Godly King Stellar Aspect's expression was as cold as ice. His eyes flickered with a cold, venomous light. He silently circulated his energy to suppress his injuries and glared angrily at Ji Tianxing in the distance. He shouted angrily, "Little bastard, are you determined to kill me and swear to go against His Highness the God Emperor? It's not too late for you to stop now. Don't make any more mistakes and be consigned to eternal damnation." Godly King Stellar Aspect knew that his identity as Divine Envoy Ji Tianxing and his strength at the Sixth Firmament Divine Monarch realm was no longer enough to suppress him. If he wanted to stall for time and deter Ji Tianxing, he could only use the name of the Azura God Emperor. However, Ji Tianxing and the others turned a deaf ear to his words and continued to attack fiercely. Stellar Aspect was infuriated, but there was nothing he could do. All he could do was shrink his defenses like a turtle and defend with all his might. It was a pity that his right arm was crippled, and his divine power had weakened significantly. Naturally, his defense had dropped. It was no doubt a fool's dream if he wanted to defend against Ji Tianxing and company's encirclement. The heaven-vanquishing sword array continued to circulate as dozens of blade tornadoes and sword nets bombarded him constantly. Ji Tianxing also constantly used his secret techniques as he attacked Stellar Aspect again and again. God-vanquishing sword. Burial of heaven. Heaven-piercing sword. Sword cleaving the 9 heavens. Sword of apocalypse. Every sword Tao divine power released an extremely terrifying might. After it struck Godly King Stellar Aspect, it produced loud cracking sounds. The 8 divine spears danced rapidly as they constantly formed defensive shields, but they were shattered by Ji Tianxing time and time again. After 9 consecutive attacks, 2 divine spears were shattered on the spot. Naturally, every time the defensive shield was breached, Godly King Stellar Aspect's injuries would worsen. The bronze armor he wore was no longer in perfect condition. Cracks and gaps began to appear on it. Blood constantly spewed out from every crack and gap. Stellar Aspect was in an increasingly wretched state as his strength constantly weakened. However, he was unable to break out of the encirclement. All he could do was pray silently, hoping that the Golden Dragon Domain Lord and Jing Feihong would arrive as soon as possible. Perhaps the heavens had heard his prayers, or perhaps the 2 Domain Lords did not dare to tarry and used all their strength to rush over. After another quarter of an hour, 2 beams of divine light appeared in the northern sky. Swoosh, swoosh. The 2 divine lights were as fast as meteors as they quickly approached. When they were 100 kilometers away from the heaven-vanquishing sword array, the 2 divine lights stopped. When the divine lights faded, 2 figures with disheveled hair and bloodstains appeared. Without a doubt, they were the Golden Dragon Domain Lord and Jing Feihong. The 2 of them had no time to recuperate. They were panting anxiously as they chased after them. Their wounds were still bleeding. Upon seeing the gigantic heaven-vanquishing sword array in front of them, which was emitting a dazzling divine light that illuminated the sky, the 2 revealed grave expressions. It should be here. They must have been fighting for a long time before we managed to catch up. That's right. This sword array is so vast and majestic, and it's also a king-grade divine array. It's most likely Lord Divine Envoy's ultimate skill, right? The 2 of them stared at the heaven-vanquishing sword array and did not dare to act rashly. They observed carefully first. The Golden Dragon Domain Lord frowned and shook his head gently. Probably not. If it's Lord Divine Envoy's sword array, it will definitely suppress Tianxing and his companions. Lord Divine Envoy should be outside the array. Do you mean? Jing Feihong frowned and revealed a worried expression. This is that bastard Tianxing's sword array? He used this sword array to suppress Lord Divine Envoy and is attacking Lord Divine Envoy with his companions. The Golden Dragon Domain Lord nodded and said in a low voice, "That's possible. Don't panic, we should calm down. We will know the result after shouting a few times." Therefore, he and Jing Feihong bowed to the heaven-vanquishing sword array and shouted hurriedly and respectfully, "Lord Divine Envoy, we came late to rescue you. Please forgive us." No matter what, the 2 of them had to be respectful in front of Lord Divine Envoy. They could not be lacking in etiquette. However, their shouts echoed in the sky for a long time without receiving a response. Did our voices not reach the sword array? Or perhaps Lord Divine Envoy is fighting with all his might and did not hear our voices? Let's try again. We have to use the Divine Roar technique this time. The 2 of them exchanged looks and exchanged a few words before using the Divine Roar technique to shout again. There was still no response this time. The 2 of them turned even more anxious and tried 3 more times. Just as their hearts sank and they mistakenly believed that Godly King Stellar Aspect had encountered a mishap, Godly King Stellar Aspect's voice came from the sword array. It's good that the both of you can follow. You did not disappoint this king. Don't just stand there. Quickly attack this sword array and coordinate with this king. Destroy it in one fell swoop. Godly King Stellar Aspect's voice was low and hoarse. It was muffled by the whistling of the sword flashes, making it somewhat unclear. However, the Golden Dragon Domain Lord and Jing Feihong still understood what Godly King Stellar Aspect meant. The two of them immediately felt energized and clearly heaved a sigh of relief. Phew. Thankfully, Lord Divine Envoy is fine. It looks like we guessed right. This sword array was indeed cast by that bastard Tianxing. Lord Divine Envoy has been trapped. Don't just stand there. Let's quickly cast our spells to attack this sword array.